Hello and welcome back everyone, we Weeb Online, and today I'm gonna start a new series, What If Naruto Had a Maiden Harem Part 1. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a big thumbs up, and to watch more videos like this, subscribe to my channel and turn that bell notification on so you never miss an upload. Now wasting no more time, let's begin.
It would be an understatement to say that Naruto was worn out. After defeating the final Pain puppet less than an hour earlier, he went to the real Pain's location without any rest. Conan initially sent him flying because he believed he was going to threaten Nagato. Naruto was cut off from the village at that point when the Katsuya clone he was traveling with was dispelled. Naruto insisted that he wanted to talk to them rather than exact revenge on Conan for the punch. Conan and Nagato told Naruto their story, and the blonde Jinchuriki listened to it without interjecting, choosing to believe what he said without letting her guard down. The two were later persuaded by Naruto that their present direction was incorrect, and he was deeply saddened when Nagato gave his life in order to save the lives of those who had perished in the most recent conflict. He was now returning to the village. A voice said, "So, you managed to defeat Pain-sama." Naruto felt a sharp pain in his stomach, where his 8-trigram seal was, and turned just in time to see a single-eyed orange mask staring at him. He looked down to see Tobi's hand above his broken seal, which was drawing the Kyuubi out of it and pushing the Biju chakra into another seal he held in the palm of his hand. Naruto managed to ask, it, before his strength ran out and the world started to darken. "You have been an annoyance for quite some time, but no more," Tobi replied. His tone had changed from that of a jester to one that was deeper and more sinister. "And now, everyone will think you died in the last battle, Kamui." Naruto hardly noticed his body being drawn into some kind of vortex. Tobi jerked abruptly as a burst of chakra pushed through the seal on his hand and entered his body. A deep voice bellowed, "Don't you fuck with me, once more. I will not be held captive again by the likes of you," Naruto said as the warp vortex started to weaken and he found himself in total darkness. No, it wasn't the eerie darkness that one might experience in a nightmare. It was the soft, comforting gloom. It reminded him somewhat of falling asleep. As his eyes started to close, Naruto thought, "Well, Dad. It looks like I'm coming to meet you and Mom on the other side." After saying, "My only regret is not being able to become Hokage," Naruto lost consciousness. In a different dimension, Naruto was unaware that a big, white creature was observing this development. It goes without saying that the creature harbored some sympathy for the shinobi, but it persisted. "Your time in that world is over, young shinobi," the entity said. A blue gold orb materialized in his hand and traveled through the dimensions until it reached Naruto. "Go now, and take the life I took from your mother and father. You are living in a different world. Restart. Break free from the bonds of fate and forge your own route." Alongside Naruto for what seemed like an eternity, Naruto floated through the void, and when the sliver of consciousness slipped away again, he believed that he would finally move on to the next life. He thought he heard a voice speaking to him, and then felt new life enter his nearly lifeless body, but he was unable to open his eyes, let alone move or speak. When he started to fall, he had no idea how awful gravity was. In a different universe, the plains of Dinant were the scene of a huge battle, more accurately, a massacre. Under the leadership of the heir to the Brune Kingdom, the army of Brunes had marched in, confident in their ability to defeat anything ZHCTED could throw at them. They realized how mistaken they had been in the first battle with an army commanded by a war maiden. With a force of just over 5,000, the ZHCTED army successfully launched a surprise attack on the 25,000-strong Brune army, causing chaos among the ranks as the Brune learned that the ZHCTED army had dropped the royal standard. The few officers on duty were able to gather enough of the retreating forces to stop the ZHCTED army in a fierce melee, but the troops that had rallied were only poorly trained conscripts. The Jected Knights, on the other hand, were highly skilled veterans who easily defeated the resistance. Short being the operative word. The battle was declared to have ended almost immediately after dawn. Shortly after dawn, a Brunnian archer crossed the battlefield alone. He muttered, "What a terrible battle," as he surveyed the corpses of his compatriots, interspersed with the occasional Jected Knight. With only 5 arrows remaining in his quiver, he was searching for additional survivors and arrows. He turned when he heard a horse galloping toward him and saw a ZHCTED knight charging with his sword out. A survivor from Brune. Even though he saw the archer aim at him, the knight roared and charged at him with a sense of arrogance. Shortly afterward, the knight lost his mount with an arrow protruding from his forehead, and the horse proceeded to charge, although it took a detour and sped far ahead of the archer. He said, "Ah man, I really needed that horse," and quickly, as in instantly, counted the number of knights on horseback as they rode across the battlefield, oblivious to him. "You mean 7 of them?" he said. "That hair, she's a war maiden." His face took on a determined expression as he looked at the lone rider in the second row, a well-endowed, white-haired woman wearing rather revealing blue armor, riding a white stallion, and holding her sword close to her knees at the front of the saddle. "If I can defeat the enemy leader, they'll have other concerns than chasing down the other survivors." "All right," he said. He ran to a location far ahead of them and peered around a rock. "Range is 300 alsens, 1, he estimated. I can do this." He emerged from his hiding place, removed his final 4 arrows, drove 2 of them into the ground in front of him, and then, holding the other 2, aimed the first arrow. The white-haired war maiden blinked, wondering what the lone figure was doing, but she felt almost no killing intent, other than that her knights unconsciously release at all times. It appeared as though only one member of the approaching group saw the archers standing in their path, but the distance was too great for her to make out what the figure was doing. The archer said, "Eris, goddess of wind and storms," and then fired both arrows quickly one after the other. 2 arrows struck the heads of the 2 leading riders' horses, taking them completely by surprise, and both fell with their mounts, trapped under the weight but still alive. For a brief moment, the war maiden's face displayed total discontent, but then it changed to a predatory one with a slight smile. She held her sword in an open hand that seemed to draw air and lift itself into the waiting palm. The archer's keen eyes caught her expression, and he was taken aback. As he aimed the 3rd arrow, he paused for a moment as she swung her sword, causing a wind to lift her and her mount over the 2 dead horses, then landed lightly on the ground once more before charging at him, apparently repeating the knight's earlier error. She quickly cut his arrow in 2 with her sword as it flew in her direction. He gritted his teeth, pulled out his final arrow, and fired. The war maiden's smile remained fixed on her face as she cut the arrow all the way from tip to fletching. To her slight surprise, however, the archer did not flee after using up his final arrow. Rather, he stood in the center of their path, his face practically shouting at her that he was prepared for whatever lay ahead. She started to slow down, and if the archer had run or had a different face, she would have charged on and killed him in a flash. She couldn't explain it, but she had a gut feeling that she had to keep this one alive, and after seeing him closely, she realized that she kind of liked him. It would be a shame to get rid of him, at least in her opinion. The stunning war maiden, with her sword held less than a foot from his neck, stared back at the archer as he gazed into her deep crimson eyes. "Bring your bow down." Now that he had more time to examine her, he couldn't help but think that she was much more attractive than one of his friends. "My name is Eleonora Vilteria," she introduced herself. There might still be hope for him, he thought, a little relieved that she at least complies with the introduction rules. "What's your name?" Eleonora, as she was now called, inquired. He was silent for a moment. He said, "Tigravormud Vorn." With a slight drawback of her sword, Eleonora remarked, "Very well. From now on, you belong to me." It took him a moment to fully comprehend what she had said, and then he started to have concerns, but not because of what she had said. He threw her off her horse and leapt over her sword with a sudden burst of speed that shocked her. "Get down!" A few feet from where he had been standing earlier, he yelled as something smashed into the ground, sending small pieces of debris crashing into the horse's back and Tigravormud galloping a short distance away in fear. Tigravormud got to his feet, turned to face the thing that had raised his suspicions, and froze. After seeing why he was in that condition, Eleonora forgiven him for not helping her up. A young man with cuts and bruises lay in a crater about 6 inches across. His clothes were badly burned, and he appeared to have just returned from a fierce battle. His face was also covered in bruises, so she didn't notice many distinctive features other than the 3 birthmarks that resembled whiskers on each cheek. "Who is that?" Tigravormud inquired. Eleonora said, "Nobody that I know." Neither of them heard the 4 knights approaching, 2 of whom were assisting the 2 knights whose mounts had been killed earlier. The knight in blue plate armor was spitting ki at the archer, but he soon joined the others when he saw the wounded male. When the ki abruptly stopped, Tigravormud was the first to recover, leaping down into the crater and landing beside the wounded. The individual's eyes briefly opened before closing once more. "Hey, are you okay?" "Cry out." "Tigravormud. Is he still alive?" Eleonora inquired, startled and, even more unexpectedly for her, relieved. And in urgent need of medical attention. When he was done, the others had constructed a makeshift stretcher out of spears and clothing that had been taken from the dead soldiers. "I used what medical supplies I had in my belt pouches to treat the worst of the male's wounds, including a large stab wound on his abdomen," Tigravormud said. After a few days in his dream, Tigravormud recalled his night before the attack, when Zion Fernandier, his least favorite person, attempted to smash his bow. How Sir Moshes, pronounced Reed Moss, has forced Zion to leave his chats with his friends, sharpening his arrows, and generally enjoying himself with the other soldiers. At least those who weren't on Zion's side of the conflict. Something sharp slid into his mouth as he woke up, and when he opened his eyes, he saw a tall woman with deep blue eyes, blue armor that made him think of the War Maiden's armor, long platinum blonde hair, and red ribbon holding the hair in a ponytail. She didn't seem to mind that he could almost see up her miniskirt. "Are you awake at last?" she inquired. Beautiful, he thought, then remembered. "Is it already morning?" he inquired. Stoically, she stated, "It is already noon." Tigravormud informed her, "That is an interesting way of waking people up." "My goodness, how can you be a prisoner and sleep so soundly?" she stated to him. "It's a first for me, too, waking someone up in this way." He responded, "It is one of my special abilities." "I am calling that bullshit," expression crossed her face. Ignoring the expression, he shook his head and closed his eyes once more. The knight said, "Lady Eleonora is calling for you." He sighed and climbed out of bed. At that time, a distant village. "What? W captured? What do you mean?" a young girl leaning against the table and dressed as a maid asked. Behind him, Tigravormud's, now abbreviated to Tigra, father figure and old friend Bertrand appeared ashamed of himself. Moshes said, "Our forces were routed by an enemy sneak attack. Tigra did not get away in time and was taken prisoner." "But," the maid remarked, "you outnumbered the enemy 5-1 in this battle. There's no way you could have lost, is there?" "It's true, we had 25,000 men against an enemy force of about 5,000. Moshes replied. As Prince Regnus's first campaign, His Majesty put together a mighty force. And even after Lord Tigra went all out, it was all he could sew to put together 100 men, the woman said. The maid gasped when Moshes said, "Of those 100 men, 7 are dead and 30 are injured." According to Bertrand, then again, they were trampled by their fleeing allies. The demands from the enemy leader are as follows. Moshes responded, "Unless his ransom is delivered to ZHCTED within 50 days, Tigra will become the enemy's property." The maid appeared a little optimistic. "What is the price?" Moshes interrupted her by shaking his head. "Even if it's a lot, if we have everyone in the village help," she said. He said, "Tida, please understand." The tone of his voice made the now named Tida feel a little depressed. "The enemy's demand is for 3 times the revenue of Alsace, or something of comparable value." At that point, Tida's spirit immediately hit rock bottom. In ZHCTED it's excessively high. Can't you reduce it by a minimum of 1/3? Standing in front of Eleonora's desk in her office, Tigra posed the question. She replied, "No." Tigra sagged a little. The knight who woke him said, "The deadline is within 50 days of the Kingdom of Brune receiving our ransom demand." Eleonora declared, "In the name of Radgast, god of honor and contracts, you will formally become mine if your ransom is not delivered to me, in accordance with the treaty." Tigra's expression changed to one of outrage, though it was slight. "So, you sent her to stick a sword in my mouth and bring me here just to make me listen to this outrageousness?" asked the man. "And what about that boy you brought along? What is to happen to him?" That made the knight stiffen. Eleonora leaned her chin on her folded arms and said, "For the second and third, we are keeping him here until his wounds heal and he wakes up, if he ever will. Then his home country will also be given an option to have him returned. As for the first, there's something I want you very much to do for me." Not long after at the shooting range, Tigra stood poised to fire an arrow. Several men who were laughing are standing to the side. Everyone saw the arrow fly far over the wall behind the targets after he let it fly. Someone boasted, and the second one was unsuccessful. The woman knight questioned, "Are you taking this seriously?" According to Tigra, "Yes, I am." A man with long black hair sneered, "I'd sure like to take his place, and show him how it's done." That made his friends laugh. One of them remarked, "Rurik, that's harsh." Everyone was unaware that someone was observing everything. Even Eleonora, who was sitting in a position where she could have seen him easily, failed to notice him. Another man questioned, "Why would the War Maiden take this guy prisoner?" Tigra plucked the string of the bow he was holding after taking another arrow from the quiver. It made an irregular noise. He whispered, "What a ridiculous farce this is." The unknown figure, whose ears were trained to detect such low sounds, Eleonora, who hardly heard him, and the female knight, whose eyebrow raised slightly, were the only 3 who heard him. And the unidentified person completely concurred with Tigra. Someone said. The second shot was way off the mark, and the first shot was too short. The Count doesn't seem to be feeling well. 3 sets of eyes were examining Tigra intently during this time. Once more, Tigra whispered for only 3 to hear, I've gotten the feel of the bow now. All right. A dark figure was racing across the top of the wall and onto an overlooking turret just as he was ready to draw the arrow once more. The man raised what appeared to be a crossbow and aimed it at the war maiden rather than at him. Tigra yelled, watch out, as the assassin opened fire. However, his warning and Eleonora's muttering, Arifar, were unnecessary because a cloaked individual leapt an absurd distance and caught the bolt midway between the attacker and its target. After landing at the base of the wall, the cloaked individual leapt once more, effortlessly navigating the low wall. So the female knight yelled, after them, don't let them get away. Can you take the assassin alive? Tigra asked her as the men started to rush. You do not have the luxury to ask that, she responded. The words, all right. I'll make it his foot, caused everyone to pause their activities and observe him as he drew the bow, took aim, and fired the arrow rapidly. The assassin glanced back, suddenly feeling uneasy, but he saw no one was pursuing him. The arrow went all the way through his right foot, and he turned back just in time. Rurik was the only person on the shooting range who was startled by his cry of agony. He exclaimed in shock, that's unreal, using that crude bow? After catching up to the wounded would-be assassin, the 3 men who missed Tigra's arrow shooting were taken aback by the arrow protruding from his foot. The tallest of them turned toward the shooting range and exclaimed, it's more than 300 alsans between the range and here. He could only see Tigra there, the only one with a bow. Just who is he? In the meantime, Tigra looked over at Eleonora. He said, so, do you still want me to shoot? She said, no, that's enough. As the wind increased, her hair seemed to be blown around by the glistening gem on her sword. You did well, Tigravormudvorn. To everyone's surprise, Rurik's head was suddenly covered in a bucket of powder. He coughed and pulled it off, exposing a yellowish powder covering his entire head. He complained and went to wash the substance out of his hair in his private quarters. His friends departed as well, feeling bad about disparaging Tigra because he was a much better bowman than Rurik, who was regarded as a master archer. Just how long are you planning on hiding? Eleonora yelled after they had left. The female knight jumped a little when the crossbow bolt from earlier suddenly fell at her feet. A fresh voice said, about time you found out. The cloaked figure was standing on one of the balconies when they all looked up. They were shocked when he simply leapt to the ground and made a safe landing. Eleonora told him, I hope, for your sake, that was only colored chalk you put in there. The figure grinned at her. When she saw the whiskers, her eyes widened to their greatest extent. That was all she asked. How? With a growl in his stomach, he simply said, later. First, could you get me something to eat? A loud, scared scream rang through the castle before she could respond. The following day, Eleonora's workplace Eleonora said, I sincerely apologize for yesterday, and Tigra recoiled in shock. While the female knight stood stoically, Naruto leaned against the wall. Tigra questioned, what are you talking about? The white-haired war maiden explained, the bow you were given. I never imagined you'd get one that bad. That pathetic excuse of a bow shouldn't even have been in the armory. Yet, that pathetic excuse of a bow was used to help capture the unknown assailant, Naruto said. Tigra turned to the cloaked man and said, so, that really was a poorly made bow, even in ZHCTED. I don't think we have been introduced, have we? Tigra asked the war maiden. The female knight remarked, the same could be said for both Eleonora-sama and myself. Eleonora shocked Tigra and the female knight by saying, actually, Tigra, he is the one who fell from the sky. That would explain why I woke up with a fractured spine. Naruto scratched his head, but I am all better now. She asked the female knight, and just who are you? Isn't it common courtesy to introduce yourself first, Ino? Replied Naruto. The female knight stumbled, I Ino? Without considering the meaning of that name, Naruto remarked, you have the same color of hair as a friend of mine called Ino. Pig, is how Ino translated it. Eleonora stated, her name is Limlisha, Lim for short. Lim was still incensed at the figure in the cloak. While bowing, Naruto said, my mistake, Lim-san. He said, I am Uzumaki Naruto, and you are? My name is Tigravormudvorn. Nice to meet you, Uzumaki-san, Tigra replied. Eleonora, now Ellen, introduced herself, saying, and I am Eleonora Vilteria, usually called Ellen by my friends. After taking off his cloak's cape, Naruto turned his head in a perplexed way. Why did you create a nickname for your surname? Asked the man. It was time for the others to become perplexed. His attempts to pronounce her last name made Ellen laugh. Isn't your given name Vila, Vital, Via, Vidlira? She asked. She laughed and said, I'm sorry, but my given name is Eleonora, though how you came up with that. Where I come from, he introduced ourselves surname first, given name last, Naruto clarified. Lim snarled, but that doesn't give you the right to call me a pig. Naruto smirked and remarked, then you should have introduced yourself first, before demanding my name. Why you? Ellen said to her friend, now, Lim. He has a point there. Lim agreed a little too quickly for Naruto to assume that she was following orders when she said, why don't you take him over to the dining hall? I am sure that he is hungry. She turned to him after they had departed. Her face was serious as she asked, now, how is it that you are already up and jumping around? The expression was actually the concerned serious type, but Naruto mistook it for the business serious type. I have always been a fast healer. Wounds that would be lethal to most other people will heal within a day, he clarified. She reached out and removed his cloak, saying, I am calling bullshit on that. Her eyes widened when she noticed that his skin was free of wounds and bruises despite having many scars. No way, she uttered. If Naruto had not been wearing a makeshift loincloth, her gaze would have wandered below the stomach, where a strange, spiral-like scar was located. Naruto took his cloak from her and said, anyway, why did you have Vorn-san? No, Tigerworm-san shoot with the bow yesterday anyway? Ellen smiled at Naruto's attempts to pronounce Tigra's full name and said, just call him Tigra, and don't let him catch you calling him that. But still, your name, does it mean fish cake? Or maelstrom? She said. In response, Naruto said, maelstrom, and you still haven't answered my question. Ellen let out a sigh. Although he was clueless, the man was more astute than he seemed. Lim is around Tigra's age and she is far too devoted to me to consider spending her life with someone else, she said. And he is too concerned about the well-being of his hometown to concern himself with his own well-being, said Naruto. Ellen gave a nod. They may not see it, but they need each other. Ellen replied. You may not see it, but there is something going on between those two, said Naruto. She questioned, what do you mean? One of the first things I learned is to look underneath the underneath. Also, I was trained to notice the slightest of changes in people in the surrounding area. Naruto stated to her. Ellen smirked and said, care to share the rest? He questioned, blunt answer or long one? Ellen remarked, blunt for now. Quite bluntly, Naruto declared, I am a shinobi. Ellen's eyes almost burst. She stumbled, that cannot be, before assuming an aggressive posture and exposing her ki. What do you mean? Naruto inquired, perplexed by her response. With her eyes narrowing and her aggressive appearance intensifying, she said, if you really are a shinobi, then you wouldn't have saved me or made yourself known. What do you mean? Asked Naruto, who was now quite perplexed. A shinobi is an assassin who doesn't care for collateral damage, who will remain undetected by everyone, even her target, and is cold down to the core. She stated to him, they know no honor, show no mercy and feel no sympathy. As soon as she finished speaking, Naruto flared his silvery blue chakra, releasing a tremendous amount of ki that instantly paralyzed her. He snarled, I am not like that. Her bones seemed to reverberate with his voice. I grew up to be a warrior, a person who guards those he cares about. The ki vanished as the pressure subsided. Naruto told her, his anger simmering beneath the surface, yes, I have been trained to move around unseen. Yes, there are times I did more collateral damage than needed, but never have I endangered civilians. Yes, I have killed people before, but never in cold blood. Those I killed were all on the battlefield, facing me and my sword head on. Yes, I have killed people by attacking from behind, but that was in order to prevent them from killing those I care about. Yes, I have taken uncountable lives, but I have left far more live and change. You say shinobi feel no sympathy, his voice changed completely. Well, for many shinobi where I come from, that would be true. True sympathy can only be felt by those who have experienced similar experiences. He gazed at her with compassion in his eyes. Someone like you would probably not understand the pain and suffering I went through. She said, then prove me wrong, to him. She blushed a little when she realized what she had just said. You say that I don't understand you. Tell me your life's story, so that I can try to understand you, so I can look at you better. She was already regretting her initial outburst 20 minutes later. The treatment Naruto had received as a young child horrified her. She had never heard of anyone surviving that level of abuse, but she was aware that there were others whose lives were more difficult than hers. Indeed, she was raised in a world of mercenaries and as an orphan. Naruto did the same. She did lose some of her loved ones, but only one of them was someone she thought of as family. At least two were lost by Naruto. Yes, she was bullied at first, however, she was never mistreated. She never met them, but she had distant cousins. His entire family tree ended with Naruto. She made the decision to find out more about him in the hopes of giving him what he had always desired, or at least what it seemed he had always desired. The room fell silent as Naruto concluded his story. Ellen was about to tell him about her own life in response to his life story, which she felt was nothing but the truth. At least that's what her heart felt, when the door was knocked on. The door was opened and Lim said, "Eleonora-sama, there is a messenger here for you." She gave a scroll to Ellen, who opened it. Ellen cursed. "Why now of all times?" Lim said. "Another summons?" Ellen added, "This time by the king himself." With caution in her tone, Lim questioned, "What does he want?" "He wants a full verbal report on the Dinant battle. Apparently there are some things in the written report that is being seen as lies by some in the royal council." Ellen continued. "If they are anything like the council from where I come from, I can kill them if you'd like," Naruto stated to her. "As much as I'd like you to do that," Ellen said, "I cannot allow you to do that. The council is not biased like yours. They just look at things in a different way." Ellen exhaled. "They just want me to explain what I meant with there being someone falling from the sky." She glanced at Naruto. "Meaning you are coming with me?" On instinct, Naruto said, "Pass." He knew it would probably be dull as hell because he had already dealt with the civilian council back home. "We are not going to the council, we are going to explain it directly to the king," Ellen replied. When she realized Naruto wasn't persuaded, she attempted to use his words. "In short, it is a summons by a cage." This Naruto finally got it. Lim palmed his face. He asked Lim, "So, how was your time with the one who made you fall before him?" Which caught both her and Ellen off guard, especially when the blonde misheard him and confused the words, "before," and, "for." Read it for yourself. Rewind shortly after leaving the room, with Tigra. Lim maintained a stoic exterior, but on the inside she felt a little warm from being so close to Tigra. Tigra felt the same way, but neither of them knew why. Before long, they came upon a bald man dressed in light blue. The man bowed and said, "Good day to you, Limlisha-sama, Tigravormud-san." He was not recognized by Tigra. On the other hand, Lim. "Rurik-san, since when are you going bald?" she inquired. If she hadn't spoken in her typically stoic tone, it would have sounded like teasing. Tigra's eyes grew wide with surprise and astonishment. "Since someone threw a bucket of dried and powdered hair remover on my head," Rurik replied. "I guess it was the gods' way of punishing me for what I did to Tigravormud-san." Lim and Tigra's faces lit up with realization. The bucket, the powder, the scream. If the message from the royal court had not come at that time, Lim would have carried on guiding Tigra to the dining hall. She sighed and asked Rurik to take Tigra's place. The end of the flashback. Naruto was giggling. Before his statement completely registered, Ellen laughed and even Lim smiled, asking, "He calls a simple prank like that a punishment from the gods?" She questioned, "Wait, that was a simple prank?" Then he discovered a sword at his throat. "Yeah. Sadly, it wasn't as much fun as placing fart bags inside teddy bears," he said. He saw Lim on the other side of the sword, and she had a murderous look on her face. She said, "Any last words?" "Please, don't say that," in a stoic voice and with that expression. Naruto screamed in his head. "You may want to put that sword down, before I remove your underwear and throw it into the training yard," Naruto cautioned her. With a growl, Lim thrust the sword forward. Ellen knew she wouldn't be able to stop her, but she tried to move. It was all over in a flash. As Naruto vanished from her line of sight, she felt her skirt abruptly rise. She cried like a girl and made an effort to hide. In the meantime, Naruto had shown up beside Ellen. He said, "I did warn her." Ellen inquired, "Where are her panties?" Naruto gestured toward the open door. He said, "Where I said they'd be." "Why, you demon?" exclaimed Lim. When Ellen noticed Naruto flinching, she questioned why. Although he was referred to as a demon, he made no mention of demons in his story. Unfortunately for Lim, she was facing away from the door, where a small group of men were standing, and the back of her miniskirt had folded over to expose her ass. One of them was even holding Lim's underwear, so it was difficult to infer what they were thinking from their faces. Ellen simply burst out laughing. She pointed behind Lim and said, "Lim, it will always be too much fun to tease you unless you start being less tense." Naruto questioned how Lim's hair could have become the same color as her face. In any case, once Lim got her underwear back, the doctors and nurses would be occupied for the remainder of the day. Following Lim's embarrassed disappearance, Naruto inquired, "So, when are we leaving?" Naruto started to perspire when he heard the words, "After we get you some decent clothes." He recalled the times he had been ejected from the tailor shop. To get Naruto to the tailor shop, Ellen had to pull him through the marketplace. 1 Alsace feet, in my opinion. Thus, 300 feet is equivalent to 300 Alsace. Chapter 2. The king meets the troublemaker after 3 hours. Naruto clung to the horse's neck for dear life, unaccustomed to the sensation of having a living creature between his legs, as he and Ellen rode out of the main gate towards the capital city of ZHCTED, followed by 14 other elite knights. Naruto was about to cry out, "How on earth can you," when his horse leapt, forcing the saddle between his legs. He gave a little squeak, "Ride like this." The others made fun of his uneasiness. When they arrived in the capital city in the evening, Naruto started to whine in a squeaky voice about not being able to walk normally for a whole week. Not long after, Naruto's eyebrows were twitching as he surveyed the room he had just entered. 99.9% of the hundreds of bedrooms he had visited during his lifetime were used to play practical jokes on the residents. The remaining 0.1% consisted of the hospital rooms, if those were included, as well as his own bedroom and Granny Tsunade's when she invited him over for tea. However, none of them matched the sleeping space Ellen had given him, even though it was the same room in which she was sleeping. He noticed and smelled a number of problems with it, in addition to the fact that she was essentially slapping him in the face with a "sleep with me" sign. The bed could accommodate 6 people. It's called a standard king-sized bed, and based on the name, he assumed that every king had 5 wives. He had to navigate the nightmare that is a woman's wardrobe to get to the bathroom, which was farther away than the height of his former apartment building. And then there was the actual restroom. The bath was big enough to accommodate 12 members of the Akamichi clan. FYI, Choji's clan. But there was no shower. Additionally, an underground fire heated it. Since the washing basin was composed of solid gold, Naruto thought about enclosing it in one of his seals. There was enough room for 6 people to gaze into the mirror without crowding. Naruto was feeling queasy from the variety of scented soaps, and he hadn't even reached the shampoos yet. And then there were his security concerns. A green genin could easily punch through the 4 enormous windows in the main chamber, the bedroom, which only had 8 mm thick glass. In addition to being thin, the frames practically shouted, "Break me." A supply of fresh, scented, stinky, in his opinion, air came from a number of vents along the top of the room. An assassin would never be detected if they simply inserted a vial of toxic gas into those ducts. If the iron rivets were any indication, the door's 3 inches of solid oak wood reinforced by bands of forged iron was the only sturdy component that came to mind. Overall, he thought that he declared, "This is a bloody death trap." Ellen gave him a startled look. Less than 2 seconds had passed since he entered the room, and he was already complaining. Well, she thought, at least he isn't complaining about having sex with me. Without noticing the smirk she was giving him, he went on, "I mean, there are more security leaks in the main room alone than I have fingers." She was busy undressing a few feet away from him, but she found his babbling very funny. "The bathroom has definitely been designed to kill me by means of scent overdose," she said. After saying, "The bed is designed to hold 6 people," Naruto stopped and assumed a contemplative position. Ellen paused, standing in her birthday suit, reaching for her sleeping clothes, her face utterly shocked. "That would actually mean we can safely share the bed with enough space for each of us," she said. His logic was causing her plan to fall apart in her face. Even after she had finished dressing, the troubled look remained on her face. Observing her expression, Naruto remarked, "If you don't want to share the bed, I can sleep on the floor." Ellen said, "Oh, all right," without giving her words any thought. She was considering how stupid and uninformed the man was. In spite of everything, she was able to sleep soundly but lightly through the night thanks to her mercenary training. Late in the morning the following day, in a long white dress that was even more skimpy than her battle costume, as Naruto referred to her armor, Ellen was kneeling before her king. Speaking to the elderly monarch, she stated, "Your Majesty, I, Eleonora Vilteria, have come to answer to thy summons." Naruto was standing upside down on the ceiling, waiting for Ellen to call for him to come closer while the king and Ellen were speaking in front of a large audience. Quickly growing bored, He glanced around and saw 3 other figures, all of them female, who all possessed far more strength and power than the typical person, albeit they were all far from Ellen. One was a girl with short blue hair and breasts that would have made Sakura envious, despite their small size. She had a short fuse, though, and he felt the same way about her as he did about Sakura. The second was a blonde woman with a stunning figure that would have rivaled Granny Tsunade in terms of appearance. Naruto merely hoped that the anger management problems weren't included in this package. He was strongly reminded of Mitarashi Anko, the cruel proctor of the second section of the Chunin exams, by the third one. Her purple hair and hourglass figure were nearly identical to Anko's. The amount of fan service this girl permitted, her chest was hardly covered at all, would have also made Anko proud. But in contrast to Anko, Naruto could smell trouble on her, as if she were plotting something blatantly evil. Now that he had those tidbits of knowledge stored away, he turned back to the person who had brought him here. "She's really nice, I thought. Did I just think that?" he pondered. "And have you brought this warrior with you to the capital city?" asked the monarch. The impact was immediate. Most of the people in the crowd started whispering. The blonde smiled brightly, the sadistic purple-haired girl developed an evil grin as if she was already planning something, and the blue-haired girl adopted a skeptical expression. He heard the brunette yell, "Oh, please," as though someone existed that could jump more than 30 alsons in the air even existed. She must be lying to cover the sacrificial losses she received during the Battle of Dinant. The king turned to Ellen and said, "A valid point, Venades of Ice, Ludimir Lowry. What do you have to counter this accusation?" After taking a moment to survey the crowd, Ellen got to her feet. She merely snapped her fingers and said, "This." Naruto fell down next to her almost immediately. He bowed at the waist and said, "I would like to ask your majesty for permission to express my opinions to one of the audience members." His unusual style of speech caused many whispers to emerge from the audience. "Granted," said the king. The whispers abruptly ceased, and everyone waited for the unidentified person to speak. "Very well. Young midget war maiden, just because Ellen here beats you in almost all areas doesn't mean you have to go and call her a liar or accuse her of something she never did. Really, is your growth going to your head to fill in the gaps?" He failed to finish as a spear smashed into him. But to her and everyone else's, including the king's, complete surprise, he grabbed it by the tip, leapt high above the crowd, and landed the spear on one of the chandeliers close to the ceiling. Then he leapt to the floor. Just as a whistling sound echoed throughout the room, he abruptly vanished. "Your temper is as short as you are tall, young one. You clearly don't know what some humans are capable of," he said. Just as the whistling ceased, he reappeared, standing in front of the king with a crossbow bolt less than an inch from his face. He walked off the dais and asked a guard who was running, "Really, what is up with the assassins in this place and crossbows?" He handed over the bolt and said, "Here you go." Then he faced the king once more. "I know that you may have questions, but I tell you no that I will answer all of them. Also, I will not serve you." The air was filled with gasps. The purple-haired girl's eyebrows twitched when she heard that her weapon was a grass-cutting tool. "The blonde bimbo with the monk's staff doesn't seem like someone who would need my help in her line of work," said Naruto, with a smile. "Everyone here already knows about my opinion of the blue-haired brat over there." Ludimira reacted angrily to that remark. "However, I have not yet met the other 3 Venades to get their opinions, so I cannot speak for them. So far, only Ellen here needs my help." The entire room was in disbelief. "Young warrior, firstly, what is your name, and secondly, why do you say you won't work for me, when you say you will only work for Eleonora Vilteria?" asked the monarch. Naruto gave his name, saying, "My name is Uzumaki Naruto, Naruto Uzumaki if I were to use the local method of giving one's name." He abruptly vanished and then reappeared behind multiple people with knives at their throats, and there were multiple of him. "I know Ellen technically serves you, but I will only follow her commands, not those that come from you or anyone else. Also, be warned that should any of you try to force your command over me, I will not hesitate to burn this city or any for that matter to the ground." The original Naruto reappeared beside Ellen, who was nearly as white as her hair, and they all vanished again as quickly as they had appeared. Naruto turned to Ellen and said, "But be as easy. As long as nobody tries that, I will stand down." He vanished after saying, "Sorry about the last bit. Had to bring a point across to some people here." He reappeared holding Ludimira's spear. Naruto held out the spear and said, "I knew an ice user before." Ludimira took the spear, her eyes wide as he said, "He was a boy who had strong beliefs and lived by them to the end." You are currently having a debate about whether or not to do something that goes against your beliefs. Choose wisely. Naruto started to turn around. Hundreds, if not thousands, of people will be affected by the consequences of your choice. Naruto vanished once more, returning to the location on the ceiling. The whole hall fell silent for a while. All of the non-militaristic people in the room then started yelling their disapproval of his actions and calling for his arrest or even his execution. Naruto thought, and this is why I hate the goddamn council. After a few moments of the commotion, everyone was essentially silenced by a deep, rumbling laughter that reverberated throughout the hall. The king was the source of the laughter, and they all turned to him. To the surprise of everyone except for two people, one standing in front of the king in a white dress and the other being the target of his remarks. He declared, "You all have seen his power, have heard his words, yet none of you see the warmth of his heart and soul. If he can move unseen and do even half the things Eleonora told us about, do you honestly believe that he will let himself be captured just like that?" The monarch asked. Though I didn't agree with his little demonstration, it told me that he is a man who lets his actions speak for him. He looked at Ellen. "I accept his words to serve only you. Make sure he guards the people," he said to her. She got down on her knees. Her voice was full of joy as she said, "Yes, Your Majesty." Following that, outside the hall when Ellen turned around, she saw a tall, blonde woman dressed in green and white approaching. My, Ellen, you have made quite the catch this time," she said. "Sophia, it has been a while," to her longtime friend. Sophia stated, "It has been indeed." She inquired, "So, where is that hunk of yours?" Ellen grinned. She said, "Right behind you." Sophia jumped when she felt something touch the back of her neck, saying, "You know, that one is getting OL." Behind her, Naruto held a twig he had obtained from an unknown source. While laughing, Ellen remarked, "Don't say I didn't tell you. He has a habit of moving around unseen and undetected." "So he is what?" Sophia inquired, starting to become concerned. "Let's just say that he grew up in a way that required him to be able to move unseen and quickly, not due to training, but for reasons I will not disclose out of respect for him," Ellen clarified. "He self-taught himself those skills." Sophia let out a sigh of relief. She questioned Naruto, "Where are you from, young warrior?" "Another world," was his direct statement. Sophia and two others exclaimed, "Huh?" Ellen went on the defensive and asked, "Who is there?" Naruto said, "The sadist and the midget. They have been following you since you left that oversized room." Ellen grinned and said, "Oh, so the potato is here, Potato stepped around from behind a column and asked, "How is it you were able to touch Lavia's?" The pseudo-exhibitionist followed suit, but from a different angle. "Simple. Most people see a sword or a spear as an object. This forms a mental barrier between them and said weapon. Every weapon has a soul, and your weapons take that a step further. They're sentient." Naruto sighed. "I just treated the spear like a living being. As a swordsman, I can safely say that connecting with the weapon's soul will make it a lot less likely that it will fail you in battle." Ellen remarked, "You never said you were a swordsman." Naruto closed his eyes and said, "That is because my sword was broken during my last great battle. The power I put behind the blade had been too little to be able to withstand the blow that broke her core." Feeling sorry for the man, Sophia said, "If you want, I could take you to a weapons dealer." Naruto smiled sorrowfully and remarked, "I doubt there is a weapons dealer in this world that can create a sword that suits me." He turned to the woman with the purple hair and said, "No, I need a certain type of iron ore and a special forge, as well as certain grinding stones. And I would very appreciate it if I didn't have eavesdroppers," he replied. "The forging technique is far too complex for the blacksmiths in this world and one cannot be taught this method by conventional means." "Very well," said Ellen. "Sophia, why don't you come by soon? We can talk more then." The blonde woman added, "Would love to." Chapter 3, The Bow and Sword. After 2 weeks, Naruto has been forging a new sword for the past 2 weeks. Naruto rejected Ellen's initial attempt to give him a standard forge. Then, to Ellen's surprise, he made a number of clones in a nearby forest a short distance from the city and had them begin constructing the forge he required. Then he looked at Ellen. "The type of iron ore I need specifically is iron sand of very high quality," he stated to her. "Well, that is very easy to get here. There is tons of iron sand that our normal blacksmiths cannot use due to not being able to forge it very well," she replied. "Why, of all things, does he specifically ask for iron sand?" Naruto informed her, "All right, I'll need about 5 big barrels of that sand." She was shocked and asked, "That much just to make one sword?" Actually, that should be enough to make the required steel for 6 swords, but I will also be making a chunk of crude, soft iron that I can send over to your blacksmiths, he replied. When he spoke, Ellen's mind was awash with possibilities. If he was right, he could turn the worthless iron sand into forgeable iron and become extremely wealthy. She didn't really care, though, because the idea was too alien for her to comprehend. She went off to get 10 big barrels of charcoal and the other items he needed. Additionally, Tigra had started spending time teaching the archers extra lessons and appeared to be able to interrupt Lim as she was drying off after a strenuous training session. She was initially embarrassed by it, but she gradually warmed up and began to anticipate it. Tigra, on the other hand, was constantly embarrassed by the scene, apologized, and turned around before leaving, waiting for the blush to go away. He learned more about the real Lim during these times, who maintained a stoic exterior while being incredibly compassionate in private. Additionally, he was starting to feel attracted to her. Naruto fed the furnace iron sand and charcoal over the course of the following 3 days and nights after starting it for the first and last time on the 3rd day after returning from the capital. 1. When Ellen stopped by to see how he was doing, he and a few of his clones were busy feeding the furnace. She pondered how hot the furnace must be after noticing a hole on one end where slag spilled out. Naruto checked the core at the end of the 3rd night. After determining that the color was appropriate, Naruto started disassembling the furnace, leaving the walls in a fantastic mess and the charcoal still burning. Ellen, Lim, Tigra, and a number of blacksmiths were present to see the lump of former iron sand being revealed. Since the iron wasn't hammered together like glowing metal, the blacksmiths were dubious and believed it would have stayed in its sandy state. However, they were completely taken aback when Naruto extracted a sizable lump of still glow metal from the furnace's bottom. He set it on bricks he had previously laid out and let the lump cool. "We heard that you can only make 6 swords out of this. Just how big are the swords?" One of the blacksmiths started. Naruto-san. Naruto examined the cooling mass of iron and remarked, "About 4 feet, Alsace each plus a foot-long handle." Another blacksmith questioned, "Then what will happen to the rest?" Naruto shrugged and went to get a hammer. "Break it up, send it over to you." He had been secretly accelerating the cooling process with wind jutsu. As the audience watched, he broke off small pieces of iron, examined them, disposed of some, and stacked others neatly by his side. "In case you were wondering, the steel I need can only be found on the outside of this lump, but some pieces have too many impurities in them," Naruto clarified. He eventually had a respectable stack of steel pieces by his side. Naruto told the blacksmiths, "You guys can break this lump up and take whatever pieces you want." He then packed the steel chunks in a bag and went to his hut to sleep because the previous 3 days had left him mentally exhausted. Naruto started forging his new sword the following day. Sadly, Ellen and the blacksmiths were not allowed to observe his forging methods after learning that the iron chunks they had purchased from him produced extremely high-quality iron. "It is a spiritual and sacred event, forging a sword like the one I am making." Naruto's clones expressed regret to them. Naruto hammered the steel for the next 6 days and nights. The process of forging passed rather swiftly because he had no one to stop him from using chakra because he was not surrounded by prying eyes. He completed the actual forging by the end of the 2nd day and proceeded to sharpen and polish the blade. When he opened his smithy doors at the start of the 7th day, Ellen was there along with the regulars and a few newcomers. Naruto locked the door behind him and vanished, saying, "I still need something else before the sword is complete." He came back with a bundle of hard wood 20 minutes later. He vanished back into the structure. After 3 hours, he reappeared with a sword that none of them had ever seen before. The sheath and handle of the sword were both black, and it was slightly bent. Other than that, the blacksmiths didn't think it was particularly noteworthy. Not special, but unique. With a simple shrug, Naruto pulled the blade less than halfway, causing the blacksmiths to search for their eyes, which had suddenly appeared. Lim and Tigra started, but Naruto's smaller knife signaled them to stop. Tigra took the knife from Naruto and pulled it out, saying, "Tigra-san, I think a hunter like you needs a knife like this." He went to check the blade's sharpness after being astounded by its exquisite quality. I wouldn't do that if I..." Tigra's finger grazed the edge, severing Naruto's thumb, but Naruto's warning was too late. Naruto concluded, "Were you?" Lim inquired, "Is your sword as sharp as that knife?" Naruto nodded, "Pretty much, yeah. It's why I didn't draw it completely from its sheath." "If it is that sharp, then there is no way you could parry a blow from a normal sword," Ellen replied. "Wielding a katana requires a different fighting style than what all of you are used to," Naruto stated. As one of the soldiers who had wandered over to investigate the disturbance said, It can't be that different to ours. Naruto told him bluntly, the style I use cannot be taught to the likes of you, or anyone else here, except maybe for Tigra. Oh. And why is that? Snarled a guard. Unknowingly, Naruto had wounded their pride. From what I have seen, the fighting style most of you use is based more on strength than anything else, correct? Replied Naruto. He received multiple nods in return. The style I am using belonged to my long-deceased clan. It is based on a core fighting style that get ingrained into muscular memory from the day we could walk, and from there each of us either developed their own style based on the core style, or learned one of 3 main styles. Each of those styles cannot be taught without having learned the core style. 2. Naruto stopped to catch his breath. These 3 styles, whilst having the same core, are completely different from each other. The first relies heavily on rapid counter-attacking. The second relies on agility, dodging the enemy's attacks. The third one is based on defense and is meant to wear the opponent down, then strike when there is an opening. Ellen inquired, and which one do you use? Naruto declared, I have my own style. He chose not to disclose his alternative approach, which entailed overwhelming the adversary with a sizable force. The soldier asked if anyone was interested in a demonstration. Naruto shrugged, causing the onlookers to perspire. It would be nice to have a battle to refresh my skills. They questioned, why a battle? Naruto said bluntly, because my style can only be used at its fullest when used without restriction. They questioned, without restriction? Ellen even inquired. Naruto informed them, there's a reason my style is called the blood spiral style, you know. As the meaning of Naruto's words slowly crept into their heads, the blood slowly drained from their faces. Didn't you say you preferred not to kill people? Lim responded. I did, but in battle, it is a case of kill or be killed, as you and Ellen, being former mercenaries, should know all too well. Naruto stated to her. Ellen and Lim were taken aback by this. Lim had already informed Tigra, who assumed it was well known. How do you know that? I don't remember telling you any of it, Ellen responded. Naruto informed them, it is being practically shouted in your body language. You never walk around without a weapon of some kind at your side, the daggers hidden in your boots not included. Also, from the times I have seen you sparring, I could tell that your fighting styles are based on different ratio of the strength agility stamina triangle. Naruto clarified. That led me to conclude that you were either from another country, which seems unlikely due to you being ranked immediately below the king, or your style has been taught by someone who is frequently in battle and has seen hundreds of styles in her life. Lastly, you never said that you hesitated to take lives, nor did you say that you don't prefer to not take them. That is one part of the basic mentality that is universal to mercs everywhere. Should I continue? Asked Naruto. No thanks, you know, you are smarter than you let on. Ellen responded. Naruto gave a shrug. He was interrupted by the sound of multiple people falling to the ground. He turned to see that everyone had their faces down on the ground. That was just common observation, he said. Naruto inquired, what is wrong? Lim thought, if that was a common observation. Then he is either a genius with a streak of stupidity or a total idiot with a streak of geniusness, Ellen concluded. Time skip. Nighttime. The events of the day were on Tigra's mind as he lay in bed. He first arrived in the morning to find Lim washing herself once more. He was nearly finished with his sword when he went to visit Naruto with her, Ellen, and the group of blacksmiths, only to discover him taking a short break to gather wood. The events that followed, however, were what he remembered the most. Common observation, he said in a low voice. After giving it some thought, he realized that Naruto was right about everything. Here, Ellen and Lim stood out from the typical soldier. And Lim sure has a nice, he said, shaking his head to get rid of whatever thought was on the back of his mind. It certainly helped when someone knocked on his door. Rurik was there when he opened the door. Rurik informed him, we have captured an old man with a Brunnish accent. He was specifically asking for you. Thinking, who would come asking for me now of all times? Tigra blinked a few times. Not long after Rurik and Tigra entered the archery range, where a cloaked figure was surrounded by some of Rurik's men. The man's face was hooded, but Tigra recognized him instantly. Bertrand, he exclaimed. Bertrand exclaimed, young master, with tears in his eyes, thank goodness you are all right. Tigra said, thank goodness you are all right, to him. Rurik remarked, so you do know him after all. Tigra said, thanks, everyone, Bertrand has been my attendant for ages, into the room. Bertrand called everyone's attention to himself and said, young master, there is no time for this. As Tigra exclaimed, Duke Thénardier's force is marching towards Alsace. Her expression changed from one of confusion to one of shock. They number at least 3,000, she said. They're what? Exclaimed Tigre, very shortly after. Please return, Sir Tigrevormud, yelled Rurik. At the moment, Tigre was making his way to the main gate, resolved to go and rescue his house. He stopped when he could see the gate. Ellen was blocking his way, and he caught a glimpse of Lim standing in the gatehouse's shadow out of the corner of his eye. Even though he couldn't see Naruto, he knew he was somewhere close by thanks to his hunter instincts. Where are you planning on going this late at night? Ellen inquired. Tigre said, please let me pass. Bertrand remarked, that's a very pretty lady, is she really a war maiden? Rurik informed him, yes, she is, and everyone here agrees with your first statement. Our mistress, Wind Princess of the Silver Flash, also known as the Danseuse of the Sword, Lady Eleonora Vilteria. Please let me pass. I must return to Alsace, said Tigre. Ellen inquired, have you forgotten where you stand? Tigre exclaimed, Thénardier is sending troops to Alsace. Once the town is on fire, it will be too late to do anything, so please, let me go. The tension in the air started to increase. Once I have finished, I will return. I swear. And what are you going to do once you get to Alsace? Asked Ellen. The Tigre replied, what am I? Defend the fiefdom, of course. Ellen questioned, and how are you going to do that? Ellen was practically questioning Naruto as he snickered while seated on the gatehouse. How? Inquired Tigre. I know of you skill with a bow, but what can you do all alone? She inquired. You may have skill and resolve, but alone against an enemy of 3,000? It's a fool's errand. She turned to him. Don't be shocked. I have pretty sensitive hearing and I heard Mr. Bertrand talk to you. Tigre raised his voice and said, I know that, to her. She questioned, you know that, and you're still going? But I have to go and at least do something, don't I? He replied. What can a careless, random individual like you possibly do? Yelled Ellen, brandishing her sword. Tigre was shocked to see the crossguard change. She went on, I told you, the penalty for running away is death. If you wish to die that badly, you may as well meet your end here. Dying in Light Merits would be no different than dying in Alsace. Tigre questioned, then you won't let me go, no matter what. Do you understand what it is that is bothering me? Ellen responded. Tigre gave her a curious look. Why don't you use your wits? After trying to turn things to your advantage, however little, under the circumstances at Dinant, why are you now about to act on your emotions, without thinking, when there's nothing you can do? Tigre started, I don't know what to tell you, but then she noticed something. Why doesn't she simply hit me? She could just as easily give Rurik and the others the order to take me away. To Lim's surprise, Naruto and Lim thought, seems like he is finally noticing it. Is she attempting to give me an opportunity? Tigre pondered. I have a favor to ask. Ellen glanced at him and said, Tigre yelled, please lend me your troops. With Rurik and the others, it appeared as though chaos was about to erupt. Lim and Ellen were both momentarily in a state of astonishment. Naruto, well, he commended the archer for being both clever and unexpected. There was a stunned silence for a moment before Ellen started to laugh and then burst out laughing. Oh wow, that was so audacious, it was actually refreshing. I haven't laughed that hard in years, Ellen responded. A breeze started to sway Tigre's hair back and forth. Ellen said, you want me to lend you them? Very well, but not for free, of course. How much? Inquired Tigre, and she replied, all of Alsace. If you will guarantee a fair government, and a safe way of life for the residents, Tigre said. Lim questioned, no hesitation, huh? Maybe I should try that with him. Ellen yelled for a small army to gather as she was leaving, and the cries soon awakened everyone in the city. Many citizens snarled as they were startled out of their sound sleep. Alongside Naruto. So, the shinobi thought, feeling the wind tousle his hair, that sword can control the winds. Because of the shadows he was sitting in, no one noticed that his eyes had turned gold with black horizontal pupils instead of blue. Orange markings surrounded his eyes. He noticed that the sword was releasing an odd energy that controlled the air current in a wide radius. Fast forward to an hour later. As 1,000 horses galloped across the countryside, the ground shook. 2,000 more unoccupied horses followed, and then, more slowly, about 3,000 foot soldiers and the baggage train. Oh, and there was one person on foot who was catching up to the riders in front. Ellen questioned, you really don't like riding, do you? No way, the last time you put me on a horse, it nearly killed me. Naruto replied. Everyone who heard him laughed. By this point, everyone knew that Naruto was incapable of riding to save his life. Tigra said to Lim, "They are almost like a married couple, aren't they?" The blonde shrugged and said, "I wouldn't know, never been married before." According to Tigra, good point. Rurik and Bertrand, who was riding behind them, shook their heads. They both thought, you and Lim are like a married couple. Ellen then reflected on what had happened after her conversation. Rewind. I was surprised. I didn't expect him to ask you to lend him your troops. Lim replied. Standing on the opposite side of the spear-headed dais, Naruto remained silent. Ellen remarked, he betrayed all of our expectations, huh? Naruto remarked, if by our you mean you and Lim's, I was expecting him to do the unexpected. Before speaking to Lim, Ellen remarked, well, you yourself are that which is least expected from anyone, Naruto. You said Tigra would challenge me to an archery contest. And you thought he would ask you to make him one of his subordinates. Lim replied. Considering that you couldn't lead him to the answer you desired, you and me ended up losing this wager, Lady Eleonora. Naruto muttered, too softly for the others to hear, at least be glad that you don't have to pay up to anyone. Either that or they didn't show that they did. Ellen questioned, it's not a bet if both of us lose, right? Someone knocked on the door. He is here, Lim said with a lot of excitement before becoming embarrassed when she realized what she had done. Ellen teased, calling for Tigra to enter. Oh, Lim has an eye out for someone. When Tigra shut the door, Ellen said, you're going into battle dressed like that. You are, ostensibly, the commander of an army. He replied, well, this is all I have. Naruto was whispering in Lim's ear behind him. When he had finished whispering, she stepped forward and gave Tigra her helmet, asking, what are we going to do about you? To Tigra's chagrin, she started flattening his hair and relished every moment of it. There's no time now, you'll have to go like this. She chose to thank Naruto for the advice later. However, we can at least comb your hair, to make it a little neater. Ellen smiled and straightened Tigra's hair as well before he could respond. At what he saw, Naruto had to suppress his laughter. Before long, Tigra was standing in front of Lim and Ellen, her hair neat and tidy. Well, mostly, a clump had returned to its previous position. Ellen saw his eyes dart between Lim and Ellen and said, what's wrong? She questioned, are you perhaps stuck with admiration? With his hands behind his head and his eyes closed, Naruto leaned against the wall and remarked, he's probably wondering why Lim doesn't wear a combat outfit like yours. Tigra's hair and blush were the same shade. There, Naruto had hit the mark. If she wishes, I could create a set of armor based on Ellen's that will have the same armor rating as light plate mail but will weigh a lot less. Naruto spoke up. Unfortunately, the individual parts will not be very flexible, so I won't make one for you, Tigra. Someone who was raised as a hunter needs all the flexibility he can get. Naruto continued. Ellen questioned, and you are telling us about this now? She had been attempting to persuade Lim to don something a little more revealing than her plate armor, which covered everything. In fact, it was a lot more revealing. With a slight flush, Lim said, I might accept that offer. Naruto teased, that would definitely make him say, how pretty. Tigra's hair decided it had had enough of being tidy and returned to its untidy state, so he didn't argue the point. The end of the flashback, the recollection made Ellen smile. She yelled over her shoulder at Tigra, the enemy number's 3,000. We are 1,000. Do you think we can win? Instead. Tigra retorted, they don't know the lay of the land. I doubt anyone from the house of Thénardier has visited Alsace in some time. I know most if not all of Alsace's countryside. Ellen remarked, so we have the advantage of the terrain. Not much of a benefit, Naruto reflected. In the world of shinobi, theories and beliefs like home ground advantage, terrain advantage, and a bend in a river makes for an excellent defense, had little weight. If an invading force knew how to fight in the terrain, the first and second were destroyed, and the shinobi's fundamental ability to walk on water broke the third. Ellen exclaimed, all right, let's win this. She was met with loud cries of agreement. Unconsciously quickening his pace, Naruto thought, at least they have strong resolve and moral. One of the knights yelled, how can someone on foot move that fast? At least he is on our side, if he moves that fast, he can definitely prove to be an asset against the enemy. Tigra replied. His remarks further enhanced the lesson. The following morning, close to Alsace, a number of farmers stopped working to gaze at the army that was passing, more specifically, the two dragons that led the army. They knew that something significant was going to happen even though they had never seen dragons before. Everyone was aware that a major conflict was imminent. Nobody realized that the battle between two of the most powerful individuals in the kingdom would set off the powder keg. Daydreaming about the slaughter and devastation of Alsace, Xion Thernadir rode at the head of the army, which numbered 3,000. For the 10th time, he reflected on the moment he received his 2 dragons, one of which was his mount and the other accompanied his army in destroying Alsace. Rewind illuminated by reddish lamps, Xion entered his father's audience chamber. The chief advisor stood about midway between the door and his father's throne. Xion said, "You called for me, father." Count Thénardier said, "I have something I want you to do." He was a large man with beard and regular hair all over his face, and despite his deep affection for his family, he wasn't above frightening them. His eyes followed Xion's to the map that hung on the wall to his right like a tapestry. "Take 3,000 troops and head toward Alsace," he stated. Alsace? The territory of that miserable Vorn, who unceremoniously got himself taken prisoner? Asked Xion. "Why would I?" His next question was cut off by his father. "I have a parting gift for you." As Xion, his father, and the advisor entered what appeared to be a dungeon but was actually something far more terrifying, they were startled by 2 deep screeching roars. He turned to see 2 hideous creatures coming from the source of the roars. As soon as Xion realized they were dragons. More precisely, an earth dragon and a wyvern dragon. His astonishment gave way to avaricious delight. Unconsciously, he was twitching his fingers with excitement. Regarding the wyvern that Xion was admiring, the advisor said, "We're almost done breaking him in. If you take him into battle today, he will perform magnificently." When Xion said, "You're giving this dragon to me," he gave a malevolent laugh. "Just you watch, Vorn. I'm going to burn you whole territory down." His father informed him that he was also taking the earth dragons. Xion was neither surprised nor frightened by the dragon's subsequent roar, and if anything, his already malevolent grin grew even more pronounced. The end of the flashback. Several people turned to watch his army pass, and Xion momentarily snapped out of his reverie to look around. Xion yelled to his men, who had long since left and had grown accustomed to the 2 dragons' menacing presence, "That's it. Slowly, so they get a good look." In order to prevent them from running away, they were also grateful that their horses had been raised near these animals. Not caring if anyone in the crowd heard him, he yelled, "Think hard whether you're with the house of Thénardier, or the house of Ganelon, you men and women of Brune." With an evil laugh, he put an end to his outcry. The constant sounds of horses treading on the ground drowned out the groans of some of his knights, many of whom questioned how this jerk had avoided being killed by the dragons. Returning with Count Thernadir in the interim. The strongest warrior in Thénardier's army started. "So then, the reason why you sent Lord Xion to Alsace is. Now that Prince Regnaz has fallen in battle, it leaves none left capable of ruling as king." Thénardier continued. "The hegemony of Brune rests with me, or with Ganelon. It will have to be settled at some point." He glanced at the map. Alsace, it is indeed a land of little to no imprudence. Too far removed from the center. However, Ganelon may snatch it up. The soldier questioned, "So you're reducing it to ashes? Still, sending 3,000 soldiers to such a remote location, not to mention those 2 dragons." Thénardier smirked and said, "We have to be thorough because they are weak. I also want that dragon to become accustomed to Xion. He may be a loud mouth, but Xion still has some talent at being a strategist, if only a little." In Alsace at this time, Alsace was experiencing a mass exodus, with the elderly taking sanctuary in the temple and the rest of the population fleeing their homes and hiding in the mountains or woods. Naturally, Tida was also assisting visitors to the temple. Rewind. "I'll stop Ganelon's movement one way or another," said Moshes. Right now, he, Bertrand, and Tida were standing in the Vorn mansion's main hallway, debating what to do next. "Bertrand, you go to ZHCTED and inform Tigra of this matter." According to Bertrand, "Leave it to me. I shall be sure to bring the young lord back with me." Moshes instructed the young maid, "Tida, you evacuate the residence together with the soldiers. Those who have the strength will go to the mountains or the woods. Those who don't will go to the temple. Not even Thénardier will want to make an enemy of the temple now." According to Tida, right, the end of the flashback. An Alsace soldier who was passing by said, "Tida, what are you doing? Aren't you taking refuge outside the city?" She replied, "I'm staying with the estate. I want to be there to greet Lord Tigra when he returns." Soon after, Tida found herself in front of what was, in a sense, the emblem of the House of Vorn. A black bow with long, red-fletchinged arrows. As she gazed at the bow, a ghostly memory materialized in her eyes. Tigra paid his respects to his ancestors at the bow before leaving to join the army marching towards Dinant. Rewind while eating the breakfast Tida had made for him, Tigra remarked, "Every time I look at that bow, I think to myself, something about it seems stuffy." Standing beside him with a jug of water, Tida said, "You mustn't say that, Lord Tigra. It is a precious family heirloom, left to you by your forebears." Tigra remarked, "That's why I pay my respects every day. I did it today, too, like always. It's been 2 years now since father died. I'm still not much of a feudal lord, but Bertrand is here, and you're here, Tida. It's because of you two that we're getting by as well as we are. What's come over you all of a sudden this morning?" Tida blushed and stammered, possibly misinterpreting his words. She quickly composed herself. "This isn't like you, Lord Tigra." "Thanks." Tigra made her flush once more with that one word. Tida started crying as she exclaimed, "No, please stop that. Let me see you off the way I always do." At that, she didn't recognize this Tigra at all. At the main gate in front of the 100 men who would join him and Tigra in the crown prince's presence, Bertrand stood. Bertrand informed them, "The young lord will be here soon." Since Tigra was known for oversleeping in the neighborhood, everyone laughed when he said, "Though, I'm sure he's catching hell from Tida for oversleeping again." Returning to the mansion, Tida questioned, "Why? Why must you go out to war, Lord Tigra?" "We have been summoned by His Majesty," Tigra assured her, "as a count in the kingdom of Brune, and head of the House of Vorn. It's only right." Her anxieties did not lessen in the slightest. "But," she uttered, "everything is fine." Tigra put his hand on her shoulder and said, "I promise, I'm coming back. It's a huge army," he said, adding, "We're just going to be placed at the rear." The end of the flashback. When Tida woke up from the memory, she was crying to the pictures of Tigra riding off to battle while holding the black bow. "Lord Tigra," she whispered, "you're returning. You mean to return, Lord Tigra?" She was brought back to reality by loud screams and the sound of wood breaking. "Lord Tigra." She uttered those words. Within the city, soldiers ran amok throughout the city, pillaging and looting anything they wanted, and shouts of joy could be heard everywhere. Zion grinned and laughed with delight on a hilltop overlooking the city. A group of soldiers gathered in the courtyard in front of the temple, shouting triumphantly and brandishing their weapons. The people seeking safety huddled in fear inside the temple. Alongside Zion, HMPH. Zion looked back at his pets and muttered, "It would be fun in one sense, if we used the dragons, but I can't go against the word of my father. There's not much thrill in smashing it up with a town as flu-bitten as this one." Rewind. The sense of towns are still unfamiliar to the dragons. The advisor advised keeping them inside the town. "What? Then, is there really no point?" Zion objected, saying, "There's a point. You use the dragons to daunt them," his father said, frightening him. "Not only Alsace, either. This serves as a warning to the entire Brunian population. Think of opposing Thénardier as a life sacrifice." The end of the flashback. "What? There aren't any inhabitants?" Incredulously, Zion asked the soldier reporting in. The soldier reported, "It seems they ran away into the woods, and the rest appear to have taken refuge inside the temple. What should we do?" "It is forbidden to enter the temple. All of Brune's temples will turn against us if we attack the temple. Let them be," Zion ordered. His frustration eased when his eyes turned towards the lone mansion on the other side of the city. Letting out an evil laugh, he said, "The Vorn home, huh?" After a while, Tida watched the soldiers tearing through the city from a partially open window. She began, "Lord Tigra," but was interrupted by the sound of objects rattling downstairs. As she ran lightly down the stairs, she noticed that Zion Thénardier was the one causing chaos downstairs, and his attention was drawn to her by her abrupt, sharp intake of breath. "Why are you in this place?" With all the defiance she could muster, she asked. Zion's face changed to one of lechery. "You're a pretty young woman, aren't you?" he inquired. Feeling disgusted, Tida told him to go. "What? I don't think I heard you," Zion said, placing a hand behind his ear. He mockingly remarked, "It appears that Vorn idiot is also terrible at grooming his maids." He then added, in a voice that was deadpan, "Go on, say it one more time." When Tida said, "Go away." "What?" Zion lied, "Speak up, I can't hear you." He could definitely hear her, but he was enjoying her discomfort. "I told you to leave this place. This town and this estate belong to Lord Tigra," Tida cried. "Avoid touching anything at all. I told you to fuck off, and you heard it, leave now." Tida, terrified beyond belief, attempted to back away as Zion drew his sword and ascended the steps toward her. The lecherously smirking Zion suddenly slashed her skirt, causing her to dash to one of the cupboards and frantically search through it. "Have you finished playing tag?" As Zion walked up to her, he smirked. Her response was to charge at him with the dagger she had stashed on the shelf. Zion used his sword to send the dagger flying into the ceiling with no effort at all, then pushed her back against the wall while he held the tip of his sword at her throat. She then started chopping her clothing from throat to groin, slicing through all layers of skin without scratching her. Zion grinned as her breasts and femininity emerged. To Zion's dismay, destroying her clothing had little effect on her personality. Tigra's name was still being called out by her. "What is this girl, huh? You, as a maid, are you harboring feelings for your master?" he asked. "No, that isn't accurate," Tida objected violently. With his sword aimed directly at her face, Zion pushed her back as he walked up and said, "That Vorn guy hasn't paid his ransom, and is probably being sold into slavery right about now. Shall I do the same with you?" Her expression turned irate at his remarks. "If you're lucky, you might be able to see him again. You'll be slaves yourselves. You may get what you want." He grabbed the bow she was holding and threw her onto her back, ripping it from her fingers as Tida practically yelled at him that Tigra would return. Zion tossed the bow aside, fortunately within arm's reach, and when Tida attempted to reach for it, he grabbed both of her arms with one hand while using the other to grope her breasts. "Cry out his name and feel free to gasp as much as you like," Zion said as he moved his hand to rip off what was left of her clothing after ceasing to caress her breasts. Zion was flung back, his hand pointing directly at the sky, and neither of them heard the arrow whizzing through the air because he was thinking lecherously and Tida was frozen in terror. When the inevitable rape never materialized, Tida opened her eyes, which had been closed, and her eyes widened as she realized why the molestation had stopped. An arrow protruded on either side of his dominant right hand, and as Zion slowly looked up, blood began to fall onto his face, his blood. When the pain finally registered in his mind, he began to scream. Tida heard a voice she was too happy to hear over his cries. "Tida, Jumo!" Tigra shouted out as he galloped towards her with Rurik and a few knight close behind. "Jump!" Overcome by joy, Tida did just that, ignoring the fact that her ruined garments flew upward, exposing her body to the world as she started to fall. Tigra saw the pikeman waiting for him too late. The weapon held out in front of his horse's legs tripped it, and Rurik shot the soldier at close range while Tigra used the saddle as a springboard to launch himself towards the falling Tida. He grabbed her while she was still in the air, about 10 inches off the ground, and didn't care that she was wearing the next best thing to a birthday suit. Thankfully, Ellen was there at that moment, using her winds to gently lower them to the ground after first catching them both in the horse. Naruto then materialized behind them, covering Tida's shoulders with a cloak he had scavenged from a recently dead enemy soldier. "Isn't it true that you are a reckless person?" Tida gasped when she saw Ellen riding forward, her armor and clothes leaving little room for interpretation, and she started to feel a little envious of Ellen's progress in a particular area. Tida was beginning to get confused when Ellen said, "I don't mean to hold this over you, but if I hadn't been here, you'd be seriously injured and I'd probably have to work my way out of the grudge Lim would hold against me." Tigra uttered, "The wind," before recognizing something. "Yes." Ellen gripped the sword by the blade and hilt and remarked, "Such is my Arifar. This is a sword that controls the wind, permitted only to war maidens of its choice." Tigra and Tida's hair was ruffled by the sword's little breeze, and Naruto's hair attempted to do the same, but it was as dense and obstinate as he was. Ellen said to the three of them, "Oh, it seems to like you." Tigra realized they still had a battle to win as the wind died down. "Zion," he said as he turned to face his house. "Zion?" Naruto and Ellen inquired. Tigra clarified, "The eldest son of the house of Thenardier and its next head." Ellen remarked, "Well, then he's their commander." In an attempt to seize Zion, Rurik led a group of knights into the mansion on foot. "Lord Tigra." With tears of happiness that he had returned at last, Tida said. When Tigra said, "Tida," she began to cry even more. "Now that I think about it, why were you?" She pointed to the bow she was still holding on to and said, just in case anything were to happen, I wanted to at least carry this out with me." "You're an idiot. This is where you ought to have fled to," like an older brother would reprimand his younger sister, Tigra chastised her. She shot back, "You left me in charge of taking care of your home, and I just couldn't do that." She gave him a hug. Returning the hug, he said, "Thank you." Naruto remarked, "You know, Ellen, we can be glad Lim isn't here." "I agree." She had grown very envious. "He's the younger sisterly type, then, isn't he?" Ellen uttered those words. Tigra and Tida parted ways. Tigra said, "It's not that. Tida is just a childhood friend and we are basically family," but then he noticed a flash in the trees nearby. With the help of his hunting-honed reflexes, he grabbed the arrow and stopped it less than an inch from Tida's face before sending it back the way it came, striking the enemy archer in the face. "Nice," Naruto praised inwardly before noticing Tigra's injury just before it began to register in Tigra's memory. When Tida saw the wound, she immediately tore a piece of fabric from her already ripped dress and bound Tigra's hand. "Are you able to fight?" Ellen inquired. "No issue." Tigra flexed his hand experimentally and found that Tida's makeshift bandaging was not uncomfortable. "I can," he said. "All right." Ellen rode off to rout the remaining soldiers, saying, "Follow as soon as you can then." Naruto stopped Tigra just as he was about to flee after her. Naruto said to him, "If I were you, I would take action regarding that bow." "My bow?" Tigra questioned, perplexed, until he noticed the bow's crack. Tida started to ask Naruto, "How did you," but he had already left, "disappear like that?" Looking around for another bow, Tigra muttered, "He always does that." After noticing his inquisitive eyes, Tida said, "Lord Tigra," and turned to face her, who was brandishing the black bow. Now is the time for this. Fortunately, she had on the cloak Naruto had given her, otherwise, Tigra would have turned his attention away from the bow and stared at her breasts because of where she was holding it. "Only use this bow when absolutely necessary," the voice of his father replayed itself in his mind. "Isn't that the present moment?" Tigra inquired. He took the bow, stealing his resolve, and exchanged it for the broken one, to Tida's smile. The bow was about twice as long as his broken one, but to Tigra, it seemed as if he had been using it all his life. As Bertrand passed by, he noticed Tigra extending the bow. "Lord Ors, the young lord has finally taken up that bow," he replied. In the meantime, Naruto shunts across the town's rooftops after leaving Tida and Tigra, heading to the spot where Thénardier's men had breached the town's wall. He arrives just in time to see a man he assumed to be Zion, based on the unique armor he was wearing, riding out with his hand in his hand, while another battalion of enemy soldiers rushes towards the breach with the intention of strengthening those still inside the town. With a mumble, "Not on my watch," Naruto pulled out several paper tags and an equal number of kunai. Close by, while driving the enemy back the way they came, Ellen and her knights were nearly at the breach when a series of explosions rocked the ground beneath them. Wondering what was happening, Ellen nearly stepped into a piece of shrapnel that resembled the tip of a knife blade, but Arifar was able to create a wall of wind in time. "From where did this originate?" Ellen asked as she picked up the piece of knife and examined it. The answer came from another explosion, but this time it was a spearhead that was hurled into a nearby wooden beam at a tremendous velocity instead of a piece of knife. The fragments of rock, stone, and blood that also flew around were not included in that. As she heard the enemy call for the retreat, she was fortunate that the explosion that sent the spearhead flying was the final one. She was astounded to discover, after the dust had settled, that the space between the buildings and the wall was completely demolished, with craters everywhere. The cause of this particular mess slipped away without anyone noticing. "What in the world?" she started, and everyone else who saw the area thought or said the same thing. As he began to flee for his life, hoping to find a secluded pocket of surviving enemies to defeat so he could have an alibi, Naruto thought, "I should not have doubled up the explosive tags. If Ellen finds out, she is going to kill me." Fortunately, he came across a group of soldiers who had barricaded themselves inside a house, leaving the windows on the second floor open. Not long after, when Ellen passed by, Naruto woke up, and the ZHCTED soldiers who had been passing the house in question were shocked to see the 8 Brune soldiers tied up and lying outside on the street, with Naruto sleeping beneath a nearby tree. "Hey, Ellen. Don't worry, I went easy on them," Naruto shrugged at the last sentence. "I thought you'd like to know that these guys were planning on barricading themselves inside that house and holding out until that Zion guy returned to claim this town, apparently." That made the shackled soldiers turn pale. Was that going smoothly? How in the world was that easy? They yelled in skepticism and disbelief. "To begin," Naruto said, "well, to start, you are still alive. I'm positive that none of you have any broken bones or chronic bruises, so yeah. Simple." The soldiers would have been face down on the cobblestones at that point, if they hadn't already been lying on the floor. "How are you going to handle them?" Ellen inquired. Ellen almost made a faceplant when Naruto said, "No idea." "You've got them, but you're not sure how to handle them?" With disbelief, she asked. "I was just a foot soldier, you know." Naruto defended himself by saying, I never led a team of soldiers on any mission whatsoever. Inmate. Well, there are certainly far smarter people out there. They certainly are. Wait, what? Naruto started an argument with the man by yelling at him. After 3 minutes of almost constant argument, Ellen was starting to find the scene funny. So, what do you think is the most effective military plan? At last, the man inquired. Naruto said, go in, kick some ass, get out again. As the soldier muttered, I rest my case. What? It's a great plan, Naruto started, but was cut off by the laughter of the soldiers and prisoners nearby, and he simply scratched his head in perplexity. 1. I would have understood it if Tita had wrapped bandages around herself, but a lacy bra, at least that's what I believe it to be, in what is comparable to the medieval era. Really? The bras and panties depicted in the Maiden anime hadn't been invented yet, so their presence made no sense. Chapter 5. Following the conclusion of the battle. Following the battle, the dead were gathered outside the town, and the armor and weapons were gathered in the town square, where they were arranged into 2 tidy piles. The weapons and armor that could not be repaired went on one pile, while those that were still functional went on the other. The majority of the swords were still in good shape, with the exception of the broken ones, which were gathered in the area where the unexplained explosions took place. Although there were many pikes, there were not many unbroken lances. A third of the helmets were still usable, while the rest had been beaten, pierced, or cut open, making them essentially scrap metal. It's interesting to note that the majority of the chest plates were still functional. The damaged parts could be readily replaced with the same piece from another, more damaged chest plate. The boots, gauntlets, and vambraces were all still usable, though some were almost worn out. At the mansion, 300 enemy soldiers were defeated in battle whilst fighting in town. According to Lim, those soldiers who evaded our pursuit rejoined the main force, and right now they are probably reorganizing themselves. How about the commander of the enemy? Ellen inquired. Unfortunately, he managed to get away, said Lim. Well, that is unavoidable, Ellen remarked. Was he a dark-haired man in pink armor? Naruto inquired. Probably. Tigra replied. Pink armor is surprisingly common in Brune, and the majority of people here have dark hair. Well, this guy had an arrow sticking out of his hand, said Naruto. Then, without a doubt, it was him. But how do you know that? Tigra inquired. Naruto caught himself too late when he said, I saw him leaving the battle through the breach in the wall. Oops. Was that you? Do you have any idea how close a piece of shrapnel came to cutting through head? Ellen yelled, attempting to draw Arifar. Luckily for Naruto, the sword had a mind of its own, but now everyone there knew that he was somehow involved in the explosions. Naruto swallowed. When Naruto realized he had just finished his own grave, he sighed and said, I am sure that none of the explosions came near. What did the shrapnel look like? He inquired. After hearing a loud thunk, he turned to face the tip of a kunai. Where did this originate? It is like nothing I have ever seen before, Ellen insisted. Ellen's eyes widened as she realized the hidden message. There are too many eyes and ears here. Naruto said, this is the tip of a throwing knife that I used during my previous occupation. And you made those explosions with what exactly? Lim inquired. I'm afraid I'm unable to tell you. Naruto informed her of all the job's secrets. Lim stated, so you are not a complete idiot. Yes, wait. Ellen interrupted Naruto's yell before it could escalate into yet another drawn-out, boisterous, and perhaps amusing argument. To the side, Naruto was having trouble with the basic math of 3000 minus 300. For some reason, he always ended up with 0. The reason is that he took the 300 out of the 3000, leaving him with only a single 0. Now then, back to the matter at hand. If you trust that the enemy numbered 3000, then Thénardier's forces are at 2700. 3000. We will leave 100 troops here, to protect the town. Lim continued. Of our 1,900 are able to fight. His numbers now ended at 1,000, and it also helped that Lim essentially did the math for him, so Naruto sighed inwardly in relief that he was in a place where he could do math once more. At any rate, there are still 3 times as many of them as there are of us, Ellen murmured. How far will the enemy run, in your opinion? Tigra took a moment to study the map before she asked him. Here, most likely. On the plains of Molesheim. They can make the most of their knight's strength there because it is primarily open, level terrain, he said. So we know where they are, then let's go and kick their asses, said Naruto. After Lim's remark, Ellen had a few seconds to ensure Naruto didn't yell out again. I agree with the idiot there, we'll give them everything. Lim's statement was completed by Tigra, that's coming to them. You know, it's kind of cute, the way the two of you work in sync with each other sometimes, Ellen said, giggling after glancing from one to the other. As Tigra blushed, Lim became a stuttering mess. Above his head, Naruto had a halo of question marks. Chapter 6 Plains of Molesheim, with their spirits crushed not only by their defeat but also by the fact that their leader abandoned them without assistance, the battered and exhausted survivors trudged slowly across the plains towards the main force, some being carried by their allies and others barely able to hold onto their swords. In the command tent, have you mentioned ZHCTED? Zion shouted out at the three men kneeling before him. Impossible. Why would they be in that location? He quickly downed a cup of wine, wincing when a drop fell onto his bandaged hand, where the bleeding hadn't stopped. Vorn. That's all. It's him. He is solely to blame for this. The others in the tent were sweat-dropping at his behavior, as though he was going mad. Damn it. The man's only weapon is a bow. A damn bow. Send out more scouts, Zion said, turning back to the three men. Tell them not to go back until they have a better idea of how many enemies there are. Yes, sir. Zion gripped his wounded hand and said, I'm positive he's the one who led ZHCTED into our country, too. That traitor. What a rat. When he applied pressure to the wound, he exclaimed, just watch, I'll demonstrate. Meanwhile, in Alsace, we will double up on anything that is too good. From her spot in the town square, Tida yelled for rope donations, saying, it's for the war effort. Don't forget to contribute. There was already a knee-high pile of rope next to her, and it wasn't the first pile. Rather, it was the pile that the groups of older men and women were not yet weaving together as they spliced and woven the ropes into a long, 3-inch thick rope. The most recent contributor told Tida, along with her son, good luck. In response, Tida said, many thanks. According to one of the weavers, this is for Lord Tigra. That's accurate. Another person remarked, we need him to stick it to those Thenardier bastards. A third said, this is about all we can do for him. Many thanks for that, Tida said. Lim and Rurik stood on the edge of the town square, watching with interest as the locals assisted. An involuntary smile spread across Lim's face. Rewind. I'll be leading 400 men with Tigra. You have the rest, Lim, Ellen said. Wait for your opportunity, then give it to them. What recommendations do you have? After giving it some thought, Lim said, we can double up anything too fine, but as much as possible. I'd like some rope. You mean rope? Tigra whispered. Let me handle that, please, Tida said as she entered the room with a tray that contained cups, tea, and cake. Tida, spoke Bertrand. I'll go ask the townspeople, Tida said, placing the tray on the table. Let me handle the rope, please. The air suddenly became tense as Tigra said, thanks, Tida. Bertrand, Ellen, Lim, Rurik, and Tigra all exchanged confused glances, but they were all focusing on the source of the tension. Tida, who was feeling envious once more, this time over the second lady who had a bigger chest than she did. Are you and Lord Tigra? Tida turned to Ellen, struggling to contain her embarrassment as she couldn't finish the sentence. Are you and Lord Tigra in some sort of relationship? Finding a new source of taunts, Ellen grinned and remarked, well, he does belong to me, you see. What? Tida let out a gasp. Well, she's right, Tigra replied. For the time being, I am her prisoner. How is the young man who handed me a cloak doing? I never really got his name, Tida said. You mean Naruto, then? Tigra exclaimed. He is a free spirit who pursues his passions. Ellen did not mention that he was also a shinobi, but she did say, he is not a prisoner, more like a mercenary who is picky about whom he serves. Given her knowledge of Lim, she most likely tried to kill the poor man. Anyway, back to the subject at hand. Hold on, where is Naruto? Lim inquired. Probably following the enemy forces and setting up some traps in their camp, Ellen said. Sometimes I feel jealous of his ability to move around without being spotted. Bertrand remarked, you make him sound like he is an assassin. The room appeared to grow chilly. According to what he told me, he was raised in a society where soldiers were taught to move quickly and stealthily, as well as to sabotage and infiltrate. Ellen calmed everyone by saying, I don't know about assassinations, but Naruto swore on his honor as a swordsman that he never killed in cold blood before. Ellen turned to Tigra, leaning forward a little, and said, still, the first time Naruto told me about his training I also thought he was a shinobi, but he isn't like the shinobi we know. Tida started to feel extremely self-conscious, and something started to bubble up inside of her. I will not be defeated, she yelled abruptly, drawing attention from the 3 men and 2 women. Tida fled the room in shame, her atomic blush seemingly lighting up the hallway. "You mean that I won't be outdone? Lim, you're going to face competition," Ellen said. "What does that mean to you?" Before noticing Ellen's nuanced movements toward Tigra, Lim inquired, and her cheeks flushed as she understood. "What are you going to do with the extra horses we brought, by the way?" Tigra inquired. "Any leftover horses?" Ellen inquired. "Do you have a problem with that?" Lim explained. "We were planning to leave them in the town of Celesta." Tigra said, "I have an idea." The end of the flashback. Lim whispered, "He does indeed have some interesting ideas. Do you have fantasies about your boyfriend?" Rurik made fun of it. Despite all of Lim's protests and denials, her blush revealed something quite different. That night in front of the 400 knights in their division, Ellen and Tigra were seated atop their horses. "Young god!" Bertrand yelled as he rode toward him. "You're here, I see," Tigra exclaimed with joy. "Oi, oi," Ellen gasped as she saw him. "You mean I can't wield a sword like this?" In fact, Bertrand had 8 extra quivers for Tigra, he joked. "As long as you are behind me and Ellen, no sword or spear will reach you." Tigra turned to Ellen and said, "Don't worry, isn't that correct?" According to Ellen, yeah. In addition, where is Naruto? Did Bertrand ask. If Bertrand hadn't been burdened by the quivers, he would have leapt from the saddle. "Right beside you, old man," Naruto said. "Yo. Where have you been?" Ellen inquired. With a broad smile, Naruto remarked, "Messing with the enemy forces." "How?" Tigra inquired. Naruto stated, "What you don't know won't hurt you." Molesheim Plain, Eagle Eye point of view. The 2,700 men Zion had left were split up into 3 forces. 700 infantrymen with swords, bows, and spears made up the first group. Armed with lances and wearing armor made of hardened steel, the second group comprised approximately 1,000 less experienced knights and horsemen. The third group was the main force, which was made up of the remaining 1,000 knights, the veteran knights, who wore the best armor and weapons. It was a typical Brunnish battle formation for grassy plains combat. This time, there were 2 dragons present in addition to the soldiers. The Jekted army, led by Ellen, Tigra, and Naruto, sent 400 of their 900 cavalrymen to confront the Thenardier Foss's well-established formations. The 2 armies are getting closer, and they will soon clash. Pav shift to normal with Ellen and Tigra. "Are you afraid?" Ellen inquired. "I am," was Tigra's response. "Not really," Naruto remarked, feeling more threatened by a green genin in his native country. "That is because you are odd." Tigra laughed at him. "However, I'm not inclined to lose today." "What a coincidence." Ellen added, "Neither am I." Naruto nodded in agreement. Ellen grabbed Arifar, ordered the charge, and her army started charging toward the enemy's front lines, well, all but one of them, with Naruto easily keeping up with the charging horses. While the archers unleashed a barrage of arrows, the enemy spearmen leveled their spears and prepared for the approaching charge. While Tigra was shooting his arrows in 3-man formations, eliminating the enemy spearmen, Ellen simply called forth a razor wind to shred the arrows, causing them to fall harmlessly to the ground. Naruto accelerated and started slicing through the infantry, causing chaos in their ranks. Nobody paid attention to the literal barricade of corpses that Naruto had created simply by taking out enemy foot soldiers, but the ZHCTED army rode into this chaos, causing heavy casualties and routing the enemy foot soldiers. By the time they passed Naruto, the enemy had completely collapsed and was in a complete rout. The charge from Thenardier's 2nd Division met the ZHCTED army's charge after it had passed the foot soldiers. At first, the Brune Knights' lances were an advantage because they were much longer than the ZHCTED Knights, but as the front lines passed each other with casualties on both sides, it became clear that the lances were a liability because they were heavy. The 2 masses of charging cavalry collided with shouts of retaliation for the Battle of Dianant. The casualties of Thenardier's 2nd Division started to mount quickly against the well-trained ZHCTED Knights, until they abruptly broke up and started to flank the ZHCTED force. The Earth Dragon stomped through the center, growling. "A dragon!" Some of the ZHCTED Knights yelled. Ellen exclaimed, "A land dragon, a brass-colored one at that. Imagine taming a dragon." The dragon's enormous feet crushed some of the ZHCTED Knights who rode blindly against it in an attempt to get lucky strikes. After that, Tigra attempted to shoot an arrow at its eye, but the arrow struck the eye and bounced off without harm. "What? What's this?" The entire battlefield became quiet at the sudden voice. Ellen's eyes widened seeing Naruto standing right next to the dragon's leg. Is it an oversized lizard? Perhaps a gecko? The dragon, roaring, attempted to crush Naruto, but he buried himself and came up beside the other leg, and when the dragon attempted to trample him once more, Naruto vanished beneath the earth once more and resurfaced in a different location. A game of whack-a-mole, ninja ensued. What the devil? The dragon is being played with by him. Ellen heard muttering from a few of her knights. Alongside Zion, because they couldn't see Naruto, Zion and the others in the main division were unaware of what was happening. Perish. Vorn. Die now. Zion laughed. Leap under the dragon's feet and let its claws tear you to pieces. He chuckled once more. You traitor, you deserve it. The flank of the second column is being ambushed by the enemy, someone complained. Well? More shady tactics, similar to those at Dinant? Send 400 men from the flying column, Zion said. He gave the order. Naruto and Ellen together the Earth Dragon, which had long since given up on trying to crush Naruto and was now focused on Ellen, still debating whether she was worth a snack or should just be crushed like the others, looked down as if wondering who this new mini-runt was, while Ellen and the rest of her force kept the enemy soldiers busy. I'll show you a kind of fancy move as a reward because, as Ellen explained, I wasn't expecting a dragon. You might want to leave there, Naruto. When Naruto heard the words, fancy, and move, come out of her mouth, he started to move because, in his experience, whenever a female decided to use a fancy move, it usually resulted in a great deal of destruction and/or collateral damage. Naruto was already far ahead of her and had retreated a safe distance from her, which was roughly twice the distance between her and the small force that wasn't fighting the enemy. Ellen lifted it above her head and the tornado moved to the tip and became an orb as the wind picked up speed and started to swirl around Arifar like a miniature tornado. That is more like the Rasen Shuriken, but where are the blades on the side? Naruto thought in disbelief. The Rasengan? Suddenly, the orb began to rotate faster and made a shrieking sound. Well, the sound is totally different, so it's definitely not a Rasen Shuriken or a Rasengan, Naruto thought. Air and all, mowed down, Ellen said, her pupils starting to glow bright red. Lay Admos. Ellen slashed the sword downward, sending the sphere of wind straight at the approaching Earth Dragon, lifting it off the ground and severing it in the middle. The dragon's armor plating was unable to stop the razor wind. Additionally, the ground in the attack's path was totally destroyed, just as Naruto had predicted. As if she hadn't just defeated a monstrous beast, Ellen said, now, to counterattack. Just now, what was that? I've never seen that before, Tigra said. Of course. Ellen remarked, I don't use it on people because it has too much force, and that's the first time I've shown it off. Alongside Lim. Lay Admos, mumbled Lim. Rurik said, the enemy is sending forces from its flying column. They're on their way? We're retreating, just as we planned, Lim inquired. Zion sent out a force that approached, but Lim's force made a quick retreat. The adversary is running away, one of the new force's knights yelled. They're idiots. Let's set ourselves apart, another yelled. Unbeknownst to the Brune Knights, a thick rope emerged from the floor as Lim whistled abruptly, and as the final ZHCTED knight passed a particular point, many of them fell off their horses, tripping them as the rope caught their legs. The Brunish knight discovered that the tables had been turned on them when Lim ordered the counterattack right away. Knowing that no one could hear her, Lim addressed the Brunish soldiers, saying, you only look upward, at the enemy, and that is why you stumble. Without the anger and resentment towards Thénardier, I doubt we would have collected this much. Sir Tigra really is trusted by his people, isn't she? She asked, looking up at the sky, and there's one more thing. Near the Earth Dragon's sliced corpse even after the dragon died, the battle went on. Ellen was covering Tigra's back while he continued to shoot 3 arrows at once with great effect and composure. She said, it's just about time, huh? He answered, yeah, time for an ambush. While avoiding the blows that the next challenger threw at him, Naruto was sculling around the tumbling mass of bodies, striking at the exposed parts of those who challenged him. He was also complaining to himself that Ellen had asked him not to use his true power lest it reveal his status as a shinobi. Ellen assumed he had poisoned needles and other assassination tools at his disposal because she is not yet familiar with chakra or ninjutsu. She also prohibited him from using his cloning technique, which he refers to as shadow clone jutsu, because it would attract a lot of attention, force him to reveal his true power, and likely result in his being sentenced to death for being a shinobi. Alongside Zion, one of the scouts reported, Sir, an enemy force is approaching from the rear. He hesitantly added, they number roughly 2,000. 2,000? Exclaimed Zion, startled. My main force is no more than 600 right now. That's over 3 times as many, from behind us? One of the commanders said, Lord Zion, let's send out the flying dragon. He got up and turned against the commander who had said it, saying, the flying dragon, you idiot. The enemy defeated the land dragon. Split the dragon clean in half. What if they do the same to this one, too? It's me he will be angry with, not you. He was referring to his dad. The wyvern appeared to agree with Zion. Zion bit his thumb and exclaimed, Thinel, Zion Tenardier. You are the general. He turned to his commanders and said, what I have to do right now is, that's it. My life. Bring the second column back. We're retreating for now, he exclaimed. The same commander said, Lord Zion, we can still get through this. If the knights can hold their ground until they destroy the forward enemy, we will. Zion yelled, shut up, and punched him in the face before grimacing in agony as the impact caused his hand wound to ache. Lord Zion, get the knights to stand down immediately. Do it now, said Zion. The fact that there were actually fewer than 100 enemy in their rear could not have been known. Nonetheless, the ZHCTED army had brought 2,000 extra horses with them. Tigra intended to create the appearance of a sizable army by taking advantage of the terrain and the lowering sun. The abrupt order to retreat horrified the commanders of the Thenardier's forces fighting at the time, but they finally gave in when they learned of the army's impending advance from behind. The ZHCTED knights continued to drive into their retreating rear, resulting in a massacre. The ZHCTED army headed directly for the third and last column after the second column eventually went into full route. One scout reported, the second night column has been broken through. The main force isn't holding either, they're giving ground, said another. This is wrong. This wasn't supposed to happen. Zion replied, there's no way that the likes of a Vorn could defeat me. He looked up as he heard horses approaching, and the sight of his wretched condition caused several veins on his face to swell with rage. Vorn, he snarled. Tigra yelled, after all this, don't think you can run away, Zion Thenardier. Run away. Ridiculous. Zion shrieked in response. You betray our country and invite ZHCTED forced in? You really are descended from huntsmen, you scoundrel. Tigra questioned, why don't you look to yourself for blame? What? You make your innocent population suffer, burn their houses, and steal their property. That is the very behavior of a thief. Zion said, my population? What about my population? They're like plant life, which grows back when you cut it down. What do you care about them? This greatly enraged Naruto. He said, can I kill him? Before turning back to Zion, Tigra told him, no, he is mine. I don't understand our thinking. I only know that I don't intend to forgive you for raiding my land, and for inflicting torment on my people. Zion exclaimed, you've got some nerve. Before coming up with a thought, he burst out laughing. I challenge you to a duel, Vorn. You came after me, don't you run away now. Ellen questioned, has he lost his mind? Naruto reflected, he is still more sane than some of the idiots I had to fight before. Tigra started to ride. Lim yelled, oi, you don't mean, you're planning to fight him? Ellen remarked, well, it is his fight. Naruto said, I feel bad for him. Ellen said, don't worry, Tigra will pull it through. Naruto questioned, who said I was talking about Tigra? Where is your weapon? Go borrow a sword or a spear from the ZHCTED, Zion yelled. He had a shield over his injured right arm and a long lance in his left arm. With the black bow in hand, Tigra declared, this is my weapon. Don't fuck with me, exclaimed Zion. How can you duel with a bow? You think a surprise attack weapon like that can? As he took aim, Tigra interrupted, shall we put it to the test? The arrow struck Zion's shield squarely in the middle. Zion grinned and said, you see? That's a bow for you. Tigra fired another arrow, striking the same spot on the shield. Zion yelled, try it all you like, it will never work. The shield was struck by a third arrow. Zion's patience has worn thin by now. Zion urged his horse to a gallop, saying, enough. It's impossible to duel with you, when all you can use is your bow. Now I'm going to take your head from you, and put an end to all this. Tigra aimed a fourth arrow calmly. Zion came up and yelled, die, Vorn, without any honor. The arrow flew too quickly for Zion to see after Tigra let it fly. Zion's face abruptly changed from being covered in glee to being in excruciating pain. Tigra was slashed across the cheek by his errant lance. A number of the ZHCTED army's knights were shocked by what had transpired. For a few seconds, Zion kept walking past Tigra, then halted and let out a painful cry. Zion shifted his arm to show that the fourth arrow had penetrated both his forearm and the shield. He yelled, that's impossible. As he turned the shield as far as he could, he noticed that each of the 4 arrows had landed on his shield in precisely the same spot. According to Bertrand, young lord, to be able to shoot the same spot on a moving opponent's shield, Ellen said. He really is an uncanny man. Yes, his aim is on par with Tenten's, if not better, Naruto reflected. In his former dimension there was a loud sneeze from a girl with brown hair in buns. Naturally, she sent her kunai flying, but it landed directly on Kakashi's Icha tactics book, tearing through it. Later, after Kakashi had a serious scare, the nurses had to restart his heart, which had apparently shut down. Returning to the new world when Zion looked up, he saw Tigra pointing another arrow at him, but the remaining knights from the second column charged in before he could fire. "Help Lord Zion!" cried the leading knight. The others let out shouts of agreement. Ellen summoned her own knights to charge after spotting the new danger. The final engagement thus started. In the meantime, she rode up next to Tigra. "I wasn't sure how that would turn out," she replied. Tigra replied, "It's just as you see." Naruto appeared next to her and told her he wouldn't have died anyway. Had Tigra missed, I would have appeared next to Zion And what? Inquired Ellen. I haven't thought about what I'd do then." Ellen and Tigra were so shocked by Naruto's frank statement that they thought they would pass out. They got back just in time to prepare for an extremely powerful wind gust. As they looked around, they heard, more accurately, saw, Zion take off with the flying dragon. "You can be crushed by my father, together with your precious Alsace," Zion yelled. "I am not about to die out here." "My wind blades cannot reach him at that height," Ellen replied. "Will he escape in this manner?" Tigra pondered. "Will we allow him to leave?" He heard a voice in his head say, "Shoot the dragon." Tigra glanced around before noticing that his bow was emitting an aura of some sort. The voice repeated, "I'll say it again. Shoot the dragon." "Was that you?" Tigra inquired, but his thoughts were interrupted by pictures of Tita wearing her ruined clothing. Ignoring his curiosity, Tigra pulled out the bow once more. As he got to full draw, he noticed that white energy was joining the dark blue-black energy that was accumulating at the arrow's tip. Ellen asked Arifar, "Are you lending him your power?" As soon as Naruto saw the energy, he had a negative feeling. He quietly switched on his sage mode and was startled to discover that the energy was dark energy. He thought, "I hope that energy is not what I think it is." The arrow that Tigra shot transformed into a beam of blue and black energy that raced at breakneck speed in the direction of the flying dragon. "I am impossible!" Zion exclaimed, noticing the energy bolt coming closer. Both he and the dragon were ripped apart by the impact, and the corpses fell to the ground and into a nearby lake. The Thénardier soldiers' last embers of resistance went out when they saw the dragon and their lord killed, and they started to surrender without a fight. Finally, the Battle of Alsace was over. Later that evening, as Naruto was getting ready for bed, he heard his sleeping quarters door softly open and close. Naruto was offered one of the guest rooms in the mansion after the army had returned to Alsace following the battle. He noticed Ellen slinking over to his bed as he left the restroom without a shirt. He frightened her by saying, "If you were looking for me, you could have just knocked on the door." He could still see a lot of her cleavage through the loose nightgown she was wearing. She tried to think of a plausible excuse for her intrusion, saying, "I thought you'd be lonely in this unfamiliar place, and thought you'd already be sleeping. I didn't want to wake you." "Oh, that's all right. Besides, growing up without anyone to really call family makes it very hard to become lonely in the first place," Naruto replied. She let out a sigh of relief, grateful that he was somewhat foolish for once. Her head jerked up when she said, "And besides, you would have heard me if I were asleep." "Don't tell me," she thought. "People say I tend to shout in my sleep unless I sleep outside." Naruto replied, "And sometimes even then." "Oh God, that is even worse." Ellen started to perspire a little. "And according to one of my teachers, I kinda start attacking those nearby whenever I sleepwalk. How did I get myself into this situation?" Ellen was perspiring even more. Naruto shrugged and said, "But that apparently only happens very rarely." Ellen let out a sigh of relief. She reasoned, "I had better not do anything stupid tonight." She said, "Do you mind if we sleep together?" Naruto replied, "Yeah, sure, you can have the bed." Ellen's happiness clouded her judgment. "My, Thank yeeh. She nearly yelled. Where are you going to sleep? Quite bluntly, Naruto said, on the floor. On the side of the room, close to the wall, he was arranging a sleeping roll that he had retrieved from somewhere. Ellen's final pieces of her plan fell apart in her head. She had intended to spend the night with Naruto and then kiss him good morning the following day. And to her utter dismay, Naruto sleepwalked that night, among other nights. As she joyfully worked on making bread rolls for herself, Tigra, Bertrand, Naruto, Lim, and Ellen, Tida was humming to herself. 3 rolls were in the oven right now, and she had already completed baking a number of others behind her. With the exception of an unidentified individual going about at night and pulling pranks, life in Alsace had largely returned to normal after the Battle of the Molesheim Plains a few days prior. However, for some reason, the jokes made everyone laugh, including those who were caught in them. On many occasions, Naruto had shown himself to be both incredibly helpful and a complete moron, primarily by assisting in the reconstruction of damaged or destroyed structures. To the amusement of those who watched, he also proved to be a lot of fun for the kids, who literally swarmed all over Naruto whenever he played with them. Ellen once attempted to join in on these play sessions as well, but one of the young girls grabbed her shirt and attempted to use it to climb up her. Apparently, Naruto benefits from using clothing to climb. Well, Ellen turned red, Naruto faintly bled, and the fathers of the children followed suit, each of them suffering from a nosebleed of varying degrees, while the women were envious of Ellen's larger breasts before ensuring the men slept on the couches for a few days. The girl from earlier fell face first into Ellen's cleavage after Ellen abruptly tripped. The girl made herself comfortable using Ellen's breasts as pillows in a scene that could be considered perverted, but it was clear to all, still conscious, onlookers that it wasn't. The girl whispered, so soft and comfortable, before dozing off and snoring sweetly. Ellen's blush wasn't getting any better, in fact, it was getting worse. The relationship between Tigra and Lim, as well as that between Naruto and Ellen, has become a hot topic of conversation among both men and women. By this point, everyone knew that Tigra and Lim had feelings for one another, but they were either too scared to act on them or too dim to see what they were. It was jokes, not rumors, about Naruto and Ellen's relationship. Despite their brief acquaintance, one of the first things that every man and woman in Alsace learned about him was that he was unique, and they unofficially created a new degree in his honor. This complements the current 3 degrees in the following ways. Slightly dense. After a short time, the person will realize that their significant other is attracted to them. Moderately dense. After going to considerable measures to help him or her realize it, the person will realize that their significant other has feelings for them. Very dense. It took a few hours for the confession to sink in, and only then will the person realize that their significant other has feelings for them. The new degree, 2. Naruto level denseness. The individual will only notice that his significant other tells him repeatedly that she loves him while literally slapping him in the face with a "I love you" sign for at least a month. Even then, he might not notice it. To top it all off, he misinterprets or misunderstands every romantic move the other person makes, hopefully in a positive way. The key word here is hopefully. The misinterpretation could ruin someone's day. Since the namesake was the only known instance of the last level, it currently only applies to males, at least until a female is discovered that has attained that level of denseness. What transpired the night following the battle, or more specifically, how Naruto and Ellen got to town, was another topic of discussion. As usual, Naruto was vivacious and upbeat, but Ellen was displaying symptoms of sleep deprivation. Scratch that. The bags under her eyes revealed that she had hardly slept at all during the night and was so exhausted that she could pass out at any time. This initially sparked rumors that they had joined at the hip, but as soon as one noticed the disparity in their moods, the rumors were promptly put to rest. The rumors were dispelled because Ellen also displayed symptoms of depression. Apart from these facts, it was obvious to everyone that Naruto was more complex than he appeared to be. He exuded an inexplicable aura of mystery. When the citizens first saw him practically consuming 20 bowls of ramen or his ability to move at extremely high speeds, they reluctantly accepted his explanation that he was a unique mercenary. He gave the following explanation for the second. If you had undergone the same training as me, you would have been able to do the same. He had previously undergone rigorous training. After training with the biggest pervert in the world for 2.5 years, a normal person wouldn't be able to remain sane, but Naruto didn't consider that. Humming as she made a breakfast platter for Tigra and carried it to his room, Tida grinned at the memories. "Lord Tigra, break," she said as she opened the door, losing sight of what was happening in Tigra's room. Lim was kneeling over Tigra with her sword in his mouth. Tida started, Everywhere in Alsace. Lord Tigre. An exclamation from the manor followed. While the locals either sighed or laughed, the residents of ZHCTED wondered what had happened. The locals merely stated that Tida had just attempted to wake Tigre up, likely, when questioned for clarification. Returning to the mansion, Lim had just seen Tida standing in the doorway and turned around. At least he was awake now, but Tigre was trying to keep his head still in case the sword cut him. At the table later, Tida yelled at Lim, "You wake him up with your sword? Are you totally insane? What if he had gotten hurt?" Lim objected, saying, "But it was the only way I know of to wake him up." Tigre attempted to soothe Tida by saying, "Hey, it's all right, isn't it? I can still eat, no problem." "Tried is the key word here." Tida chastised him, saying, "No, it's not all right." Tigre tried to shift the conversation by saying, Anyway, what's going on? You were up and at them so early this morning." "Why, yeah," Lim stammered, and Tida looked like he had just discovered something. "Ellen had received an immediate summons from the ZHCTED king and left shortly after you fell asleep yesterday," Lim informed him. Tigre said to her, "You don't sound happy about this." Tida looked at Lim and nodded. "According to Lim, I am worried about Eleonora-sama." Tigre questioned, "What, is she in trouble?" "No, but she needs Naruto as much as he needs her, and his reckless and unthought-through actions made him walk a very thin line the last time he met the king. If he crosses that line this time, Ellen will be duty and honor bound to kill him." Lim started to experience tears in her eyes. That may break Ellen's heart more than anything thus far in her life. In the meantime, Silesia, the ZHCTED capital, the assembly hall was packed with people again, all of them staring at the lone figure in white kneeling in front of the king. Naturally, nobody noticed Naruto lurking in the shadows once more. According to the king, "Lift up your face." Ellen did. "Mistress of the Shining Demon Slayer, Eleonora Vilteria, I have heard that you took an army into Brune territory, without first gaining my permission. Is this true?" Ellen said boldly, "It is as you say, your majesty." The elderly monarch ordered, "Tell me, was there a reason why you did this? Based on your response, I will determine a fitting punishment for your reckless conduct." To watch over some of the other Venadis, including the one he naturally didn't trust the last time, Naruto had created a few clones in the interim. She had the same, about to cause shit, smile on her face as usual. A heterochromatic woman with pink hair, a purple dress, and large breasts came next. Naruto had the impression that she was experiencing some internal conflict, similar to that of the potato, who, incidentally, was also present, although she appeared to be more emotionally stable than the blue midget. Naruto knew that the blonde bimbo, Sophia, was trustworthy, so she didn't need to be watched. He himself was listening in on Ellen's and the king's conversation. "Let's resume the conversation," Ellen said. "I was hired to do so." This caused the majority of the audience to start whispering to one another. Astounded, the king exclaimed, "What? Hired? By whom?" "By Count Tigrevorma Dvorn, nobleman of Brune and lord of Alsace," Ellen replied. "HMPF. So, what was this Count Vorn's objective, his ambition?" the monarch responded. Ellen replied, "By his own word, the peace of Alsace." The king's irises shrank while his eyes grew wider. Alongside Naruto. "Oh, don't tell me," Naruto thought. "What whitewashing?" the king yelled he heard. "Yep," Naruto thought to himself, "definitely someone who cannot see beyond his own good." "And back again. Do you mean to draw our land into a dangerous conflict by behaving like mercenaries?" the king asked. Even in his hiding spot, Naruto had to deliberately take his hand off the kunai pouch he wore on his right leg, and Ellen struggled to control her rage at the king's blatant disregard for mercenaries. When Sophia started to move forward, the tension was broken. She knelt down and said, "If I may, I would address your majesty." The king said to her, "Sophia Albertas," and allowed her to speak. "Brune is not thinking of bringing our land into conflict in the midst of their strife," Sophia said. Ellen was a little taken aback when she said, "Before long, they will come to inquire of our intentions. When they do, we may explain to them the position of our land. While there is indeed an issue with her taking action without obtaining your majesty's leave, from times of yore, battle has always favored haste over caution. A person who understands my language at last, battle has always favored haste over caution," Naruto thought, although he honestly only understood the last part. Later, following the dismissal of the assembly, Sophia raised her voice, and Ellen stood outside leaning against a pillar, contemplating what the king had said. At least she was out of the assembly hall, she sighed. Someone said, my, of all the people to run into. When she was safely away from Ellen, Ludmila halted her march and said, imagine, starting a war without permission, still lacking in your self-awareness as a war maiden, I see, and you don't have that watchdog of yours with you this time, Eleonora Vilteria. Although it was difficult for him to breathe, the blood that would normally flow down his face remained in his nose because he was upside down on the ceiling above them. This was something that neither of them, or anyone else for that matter, knew, even though Naruto was actually less than 30 alsons away from them. He kept asking himself why that was the case. Ellen smirked and pushed her chest out slightly to make her point as she said to the Icemanades, HMPH, and I see you still haven't grown any, Ludmila Lowry. What do you say? If you adopt a humble attitude and bow your head, I would be more than happy to show you how to grow taller and gain bigger breasts than, whatever those are. Ludmila remarked, and I never asked you for that. You've become quite the smarty, haven't you? You, the human embodiment of boorishness and inelegance, offering to teach others? Behind her, Naruto lowered himself in silence. He scared the living daylights out of her by whispering into her ear, where I come from, we'd say that at least she has something to show for it. He did not finish, as Ludmila snatched up her spear and swung it at him repeatedly. And am I correct in saying that you are the human embodiment of simply being short and small, he said. I seem to be correct here, short temper, small body, and I might add, little to the list because she has little to no skill in observation. By this point, Ellen and several of the onlookers were giggling. Suddenly, Naruto and Ludmila were both struck hard in the head by something. Geez. They both faced a pair of breasts that were larger than their heads as they turned their heads. For a brief moment, Naruto believed he was staring at Granny Tsunade's bust. Naruto looked up and saw it was Sophia, saying, this won't do, you two. It is bad enough that I have to keep telling Ellen and Mila not to quarrel with each other. There was silence for a while, then, this jerk started it, Mila said, gesturing to Naruto after speaking. Naruto yelled, shut up, pipsqueak. The open hallway reverberated with another loud collision. By the way, Ellen, Sophia said, standing in front of two figures clutching their heads in agony. Why are you still here? I thought you had left the palace already. Oh, right, said Ellen. She turned to Mila and said, I wanted to thank you for speaking up for me. You really saved me there. Get lost, shorty. I need to speak with Sophia for a moment. Mila started to walk away but stopped beside Naruto. She then left, saying, I feel sorry for you, having to put up with her, Uzumaki-san. Well, the two of you have turned Ludmila against you, that is for sure, Sophia replied. Huh? Ellen asked, staring at her bewildered. The two war maidens turned to face Naruto as he asked, is it really that much of a deal? Surely her being an opponent will only be a minor annoyance. Ellen and Sophia were laughing at that. I mean, isn't she the human embodiment of small, short, and anything little? Ellen wiped away her tears of laughter and remarked, she may be small, but she isn't the shortest war maiden. As for her being an annoyance, well, that depends on one's perspective. After that, Sophia took Naruto to the royal gardens and described Mila's situation. Long before she was even born, her family and the house of Thénardier had a close relationship. In the meantime, in the countryside close to Alsace, Tigra noticed a young Tita staring down at him and said, Lord Tigra, Lord Tigri. Then they were laughing as they ran across a field toward a tall, bearded man with reddish-brown hair who was plowing the field with a hoe. The man looked at him and said, come, till the ground. All of a sudden, he had the hoe in his hands and was tilling the ground just like the man. Then he said that his blistered hands hurt as he looked down at them. He turned to face the other people who were currently working the field. Tigravormud, the individual in front of him replied, we are here in case anything happens. We serve so that those people can live peaceful lives. That is what a feudal lord is for. Father, said Tigra. The man, who was Tigra's father, said, Tigravormud, you are. The young Tigra yelled, Father, 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 as the man began to fade. Tigra said, Father, as she awoke in a chilly sweat. He sat up, but he was motionless in the hunting lodge he always used for long hunting sessions. He noticed Tita, who had a cute face, sleeping next to him. Rewind Tigra had just completed his daily routine in front of the black bow when Tita came up to him. Tigra said, hey there, what's with that outfit? You look like Red Riding Hood, you know. You're going to the commune of Hunawir, right? She responded. I've prepared lunch for you. And these clothes are more comfortable to travel long distances in. I'm going to see how the commune is doing. This isn't for pleasure, Tigra stated to her. Tita disregarded what he said. She said, I'm going, too, ignoring his final statement. With you, she added. She employed the puppy eye technique, which made her already adorable appearance seem almost illegally adorable, and Tigra was powerless to stop her. He gave in and said, yeah, okay. I did let you get spooked. He said, why don't you come with me? That made her instantly happier. He thought, I am getting better at resisting her. 5.7 seconds, a new record. Then he imagined Lim pulling that face, and the image alone made her instantly unable to control herself. After a while, a few of the farmers on the outskirts were conversing with Tigra and Tita. Regarding the army of Thénardiers, they remarked, we hid in the forest, just as you said we should, and they just marched past us. Tigra said, I am truly happy. Tita was also pleased, as evidenced by his smile. The end of the flashback, she woke up and turned to face him as Tigra grinned and brushed a few strands of her hair out of her face. He asked the girl, who was still half asleep, did you sleep well? 3, 2, 1. Tita blushed and made a lot of awkward motions before realizing she had fallen asleep. Tita paused here, realizing something, and said, I am sorry, I was waiting for the right time to wake you, but before I knew it, how is it that you were awake before me? Tigra merely chuckled. You must have been exhausted, too. Sorry. For the second, I guess I have rubbed it on you. Oh, no, exclaimed Tit, worried that she had become as sleep-savvy as her friend, crush, master, or whatever. Tigra grinned, helped her up, and went outside where the sun was just coming up, much to Tita's utter surprise. Okay, so perhaps he didn't influence me, but why in the world is he waking up at dawn and not hunting? Tita pondered. Letting his limbs loosen up, Tigra remarked, this is a fine day for hunting, assuming nothing comes up. When he heard Tita doing the same, his ears perked up, with more noticeable outcomes. During a morning run and flying hug exercise, Tita told him, and no matter where you go, I will go with you. Tigra was the target. Early noon to late morning, when Tita and Tigra returned to the mansion, they found a surprising and hospitable scene. That horse, Tigra said, Sir Moshes, with delight. With equal joy, Tita said, he's here, isn't he? His eyes were nearly beaming with happiness as he replied, yeah. After 3 minutes, Tigra was pleased to see Moshes again and opened the front door. However, he experienced a complete mood swing from joy to WTF at the sight that met his eyes. The reason? Tigra believed he saw sparks flying between Lim and Moshes, who were standing about 3 asans apart and glaring at one another so intensely that neither was blinking. Tigra didn't know why, but he felt relieved that Naruto wasn't present for some reason. As the two veterans attempted to look each other down, Bertrand stood behind Moshes, perspiring profusely. As he stepped inside, he turned to Tigra and shot him a look that said, I'm not getting between these two, and shrugged. When Moshes and Lim turned to face Tigra simultaneously, they must have realized he had entered the room because they failed to switch off their back off or I will kill you looks. Moshes' tone seemed to be affected by his gaze as well. Well then, Tigra, he said, would you care to explain what's going on? Tigra, paralyzed by the sudden glares of two of the strongest fighters he knew, managed to say, I will. Just stop with the glares, please. Neither of them was holding back with their glares. One lengthy explanation that continued until the early hours of the evening. While Tita was serving tea, there were so many servings that she stopped keeping track of the time. Tigra, Lim, Moshes, and Bertrand were seated at a table, the first two of whom were seated fairly close to each other. Moshes turned to Lim with his customary warmth after saying, I understand the circumstances. He said to the platinum blonde, Lady Limlisha, I apologize for suspecting you and those under you. In the meantime, Tita moved to stand behind Tigra because she didn't want to be in a position where she would be envious of the possessions of a particular blonde. Lim returned smiling, having heard about Moshes even in ZHCTED, but not realizing it was him when she tried to stare him down. No, I should apologize. You couldn't help but be cautious upon suddenly seeing soldiers from another land here. Tigra said to the elderly man, Sir Moshes, I apologize for bothering you so soon after your arrival. Moshes waited for Tigra to answer before saying, Now then, Tigra, don't worry about it. Nothing bad came of it. About what happens now? Tigra pondered silently for a while. Then, to the complete surprise of everyone in the room, perhaps with the exception of Tita, who was still trying to ignore the fact that someone was bigger than her, I'm going to fight Duke Thénardier. Moshes said in a neutral tone, So you're supporting Duke Ganelon? Tigra replied, No, I do not intend to align with either of them. Lim breathed a silent sigh of relief. And you're sure you reached this conclusion after careful thought? Mashes responded. I'm obligated to defend Alsace, which I inherited from my father and the people who live in it, said Tigra. No, even without that obligation, I want to defend it. I am a feudal lord, here to defend them in case anything happens. Mash's expression changed to one of joy, pride, and happiness, indicating that he was pleased with the response. Later, he would travel to Brun's capital to meet with the king and make an argument for Tigra's morality. Lim and Tigra, meanwhile, were traveling from place to place in search of allies while getting closer and unaware of the peculiar sensation in their hearts when they were close to one another. The territory of the Alsace delegation, Tigra, Lim, and Bertrand, was informed by Hughes Augur, the Lord of Territories, that, I have heard the gist of the situation from Mashes. When Rurik and Gerard, Hughes' son, first saw each other, they immediately developed an antagonistic friendship because Rurik was envious of Gerard's hair, which was still long, and Gerard thought that warriors and knights should at least have hair, something Rurik thought he would never have again after someone had dumped a bucket of powdered hair remover on his head not long after Tigra shot an assassin's foot with a crude bow he had given him. To be frank, with the request coming from you alone, I declined. Hughes went on, even though you may be in the right, you were powerless in the face of Duke Thénardier. Bertrand started to say, Lord Augur, but stopped when Tigra held up his hand. Were, inquired Tigra. Tigra, or rather, Count Vorn, you have not only Mashes, but the distinguished and powerful forces of ZHCTED as an ally. Hughes stated to him. You could go up against either Duke Thénardier of Duke Ganelon. Tigra asked in a hopeful tone, then, will you help? You are on your way to becoming a third force, next to Thénardier and Ganelon. Hughes stated. While they swear allegiance to the royal family, they refuse to maintain their place beneath them. There are many of us who think so. Tigra and the others grinned as they deciphered Hughes' underlying meaning. Early in the morning a few days later Lim and Tigra were galloping in the direction of an unidentified place, at least to Tigra. He said, the mansion of Kikamura? Okay, perhaps the unknown location isn't entirely accurate. Lim clarified, a villa, just past the Vosges Mountains. After a while Ellen poured them a goblet of wine and exclaimed, oh, you're here. With too much enthusiasm. Here, drink up, she added, adding her typical dash of humor. Then adopted a stoic professional demeanor right away. I got the king's permission for the present, she replied. She turned to Tigra and said, however, there are two trouble spots. If I obtain the land of Alsace, I must present all of it to the kingdom. Tigra exclaimed, present it? You mean, Alsace will be confiscated? Ultimately, that's only if it becomes her territory, said Lim. Don't worry, something may yet still happen that will change this. The war is just getting started, Ellen said, transforming into both her normal self and a war-savvy persona. There is however a second problem. The king said this to me at the end. Think first about the interests of ZHCTED, and behave prudently. Tigra took a moment to process the words, then gave her a startled look. That's normal, isn't it? To cover up her near blunder, Lim coughed. It's hard for you to understand, isn't it, Tigra? The problem with what His Majesty said is the part about thinking first of our national interests. Huh? Tigra was now perplexed. Lim then started going into more detail about what Ellen had said. After Lim left to answer a knock at the front door, Ellen went on with the explanation. As Ellen switched from discussing a potential opposition to discussing a potato, Tigra's confusion grew. Potato, yelled as she slammed the door open. WHO, are you calling a potato, you whore? Before he realized he had left his hunting knife with his bow, Tigra flinched as his hand reached for it out of habit. In contrast, Ellen. Lim, for what reason did you allow her to set foot in here? Asked she. I could not very well turn a war maiden away, Lim replied. War maiden? Inquired Tigra. Is this little girl a war maiden? The newcomer started off by saying, one of the prized war maidens of ZHCTED, mistress of the piercing point of smiting, Ludmila Lowry. Tigra threw Mila off balance by extending his hand in greeting and saying, nice to meet you. He was expecting him to be amazed by her. Ellen and Mila later got into their usual argument over whether or not to return the greeting. As he, Lim, and the two Venadis got ready to mount their horses and ride toward a border town between ZHCTED and Brun, Tigra said, oh yeah, Ellen. Where is Naruto by the way? Ellen said with a tone of disappointment, oh, he is still in Silesia. He said he was going to read up on some things in the royal library in return for forging a sword for the Minister of Defense. Mila inquired, You mean he is still in the royal palace? Ellen gave a nod. She yelled, "Are you fucking insane? He could try to assassinate the king or." Naruto gave me his word, swearing on his honor as a warrior, that he will not willingly approach the king to a distance of less than 30 alsons. Ellen informed her. And how would you know he will keep his promise? Asked Mila. Ellen, expecting this question, grinned. Do you honestly think he would have been able to touch Lavias without any ill side effects if he was a person who goes back on his word? She inquired. At that point, Mila's arguments were smothered by the girl. Chapter 8. A Grinder and Ice Thinner Royal Library of Silesia. Naruto was given access to the royal library after forging a superior sword for the Minister of Defense. He was now trailing an aid to a section of the shelves that were heavily dusty, suggesting that the books and scrolls had not been accessed or cleaned in a long time. The aide pointed to 2 shelves in front of them and said, "Here we go." Naruto handed her a silver coin and said, "Thank you." "You are welcome, sir, though you don't mind me asking, why are you so interested in the shinobi?" she inquired. Reaching for the first book on the shelf, Naruto stated, "I am hoping to learn about them, learn how to identify them, and if possible, how to defend against them. From what I have heard, Ellen-chan and Tigra-san are going to have some very powerful enemies, and from what I have heard from some of them, I wouldn't be surprised if they sent assassins or even shinobi after them." "You really care them, don't you, Naruto of the Hidden Step?" replied the assistant. The use of his most recent title caused Naruto to sigh. Following Ellen's departure, he made an appearance before the king and his ministers, maintaining a minimum of 30 alsons between them, and he clarified the distance he had promised Ellen. The initial moniker, the Ghost, was given to him because of his abrupt and silent appearance and equally abrupt and silent disappearance. However, Naruto swiftly returned to refute that title, much to the amusement of the king and some of the council. Other titles that were offered were Legs of Naruto the Dumbass, the Knuckle-Headed Sneaker, Naruto. The Hidden Steps, Naruto the Pet of Eleonora Vilteria, Naruto. The Honorable Idiot, Naruto the Honorable Fool, Naruto. The Destructive Integrity, Naruto, Naruto the Virgin Warrior. After asking them what a virgin was, this one was discarded. Naruto the Totally Ignorant, in addition to other, funny, titles. Thankful that Ellen had been teaching him their alphabet in secret, which Naruto quickly learned thanks to shadow clones, Naruto started reading after the aide had left. Nothing initially caught his attention, but after looking through 4 books and 1 shelf, he stopped and turned back a page to read the passage once more. Unknown book, paragraph 3 on page 128, out of all the various shinobi groups in existence, the most notorious is the ninja group known as Serish. Known for their team effort during assassinations, these shinobi work in teams of 7 and will stop at absolutely nothing to achieve their objective. Due to their unmoral and unethical methods and their loyalty to their cause, it has never occurred that a member of the Serish has ever left the order or defeated in single combat or convinced to spare their target. The page was turned by Naruto. Paragraph 1 on page 129. The signature method of assassination of Serish is unknown, as it is reported that each cell has a different method of assassination. What is known is that all members have a chain tattoo somewhere on their body, and it is said that there is a link in that chain for every target they have killed. That was the end of the information, and Naruto only knew that the Serish shared some ethical characteristics with the Akatsuki members. He was still not very knowledgeable about shinobi in this world. A voice cut him off as he reached for the next book. Naruto stopped and turned to face a short girl with light purple eyes, hazel hair, a pink ribbon, pink clothing, oversized pink boots, and gauntlets. You know, there is only so much you can learn from the books and scrolls found here. There was a small axe on her back. A pink axe? What the hell? And those clothes don't fit her. She needs to grow more than just in height for those clothes to be useful. Naruto thought. Wait. Stop. You are not Ero Sennin. Unaware of the small group of people listening in on their conversation, Naruto asked, and how would a young girl like you know about that? At least he noticed them when they took a sharp breath at his question and his subsequent statement. Why don't you go play with a doll or something? The girl gave him a glare and said, this young girl could kick your ass any time of the week and I don't have any dolls. She said, but Naruto didn't believe her. Then why don't we test that theory? Before taking his hand and essentially dragging him along with her, the girl said, okay. Several of the onlookers made the rest in peace sign as he was pulled past them. Not long after, Naruto yelled, let go of me, you damn brat, after being pulled down a 3rd set of stairs. The girl remarked, I am just making sure you won't run away. Naruto thought it would be a good idea to ruin the girl's clothes in order to play a practical joke on her later. Shortly afterwards, again after being pulled from the library to a sizable training area behind the royal palace, Naruto dusted off his ass. "This is your last chance to apologize before I beat the crap out of you," the teenager replied. "I think I now know why Shikamaru always found women troublesome," Naruto murmured. Suddenly, Naruto sensed a presence, actually, several, coming. He turned and saw the old king coming along with a few others, including the heterochromatic bimbo and the purple bitch with the grass-cutting tool, as well as a man who appeared to be a younger version of the old king. Naruto barely had time to dodge the attack before he collided with the ground, sending him flying, but he turned back to the girl just in time to see the blade of a huge axe aimed directly at his face. He inquired, "What was that for? And what is with the oversized wood-chopping tool?" With the onlookers, someone questioned, "Did he just?" The purple bitch was informed by the heterochromatic female, Valentina. "It appears that you are not the only one who got her dragon tool dissed." "Well, it seems like I will not get the pleasure of fucking with him," Valentina replied. "He has flipped Olga's switch big time there, don't you agree, Liza?" Liza said, "Well, it is a pity that Ellen isn't here," agreeingly. Returning to the fight, "Stand still," yelled Olga, the girl. Naruto came back and said, "I'd rather not. I do not yet have a death wish." Olga yelled, "Then fight back," and swung her axe at him once more. Before Olga broke the axe by smashing it into the ground, Naruto uttered, "I don't like fighting against 10-year-olds either." Naruto experienced déjà vu and recalled an incident that happened soon after he got back from his Godfather training trip. Before she was abruptly flung into one of the rock formations she had just made when she broke the ground, the girl said, "I will let you know that I am 14 years old." Standing where she had been only a few moments before, Naruto stretched his muscles and said, "In that case, prepare to taste defeat." Olga was limited to staring at him. She inquired, "When did you move?" Naruto remarked to her, "Whilst you were boasting about your age, youngster." He then proceeded to fight her hand to hand to axe. Naruto was moving so fast that Olga could hardly keep up with him, and neither could the onlookers. Olga was being totally outclassed by Naruto. Naruto was using wind chakra to make tiny, nearly undetectable cuts on Olga's clothing, but no one was paying attention. Naruto turned and left after a minute, disengaging and appearing several alsons away from her. Olga took a step forward and asked, "Where do you think?" before wondering why it felt drafty for a brief moment. "Back to the library. I still have 5 shelves of books to go through," replied Naruto. "And I don't think you would like to continue fighting in your birthday suit." "Pervert. Pedophile," Olga yelled her alarm after him. Naruto retorted, "Hey, don't call me a pedophile, I am only 16 years old." He then vanished into the palace and made his way to the library. That bit of news stunned Olga and the others. Beyond the doors, taking hold of his left shoulder, Naruto leaned against one of the pillars. "She may be small, but Granny Tsunade would be proud of her strength," he murmured, "and temper." He raised his gaze to the ceiling. He whispered to himself, "I wonder how Ellen-chan and Tigra-san are doing." He finally let out a sigh. Naruto turned to watch the king emerge from the shadows and remarked, "You can come out now, old man." The king laughed after saying, "I know you and I are not on peaceful terms, but I have a request for you. To think the one I trust the most with this request is the one I should trust the least." With a neutral tone, Naruto questioned, "What do you want, old man?" "I have received word that Thénardier is planning on hiring Serish to assassinate a man called Tigravormud Vorn as well as Eleonora Vilteria." The king responded. "My request is this, please protect them. I had a dream, a vision if you will, that those two and their friends will one day ensure the safety of not just ZHCTED, but also Brune, creating an alliance between the two nations that will last for generations to come. Then why allow Ludmila Lousy, Lucy, Lou would ever to side with that Thénardier jerk? And how do I know that I can trust your word?" asked Naruto. "Because if I am wrong you may ask of me anything that is mine to give," he replied. "Fine, I will do it, but I have one condition though," Naruto replied. As the king put it, "Name it." "I would like you to allow Ellen to continue supporting Tigra in his fight until she feels he no longer needs her help," Naruto replied. According to the king, agreed. Before he could receive a response, Naruto turned and prepared to move, saying one final time, "You are not as selfish as I thought you were." Rodnik. Long before dawn the following day, after running non-stop for the majority of the night and the day before, Naruto finally reached the border town. He had to spend the final 2 hours there because he had actually run past the town without noticing it, arriving at a village where he discovered a map of the two countries. He simply jumped over the wall when the guards weren't looking, requiring no effort at all to enter the town covertly. Then, making clones to cover more ground, he set out to find Ellen and the others. One of the clones soon discovered a guard patrol discussing two war maidens and an archer who had brought in a wounded female. Naruto didn't give it much thought because he assumed Ellen wouldn't voluntarily travel with another war maiden and assumed it was someone else. It took a little longer for another clone to spot another guard patrol pursuing the same group of individuals, but the mention of a pink-haired archer and a white-haired beauty drew the clone's attention. All right, what? Naruto pondered. The second war maiden is who? That blonde with the prayer staff is the one I'm hoping for. Somewhere else Sophia sneezed abruptly. She asked the staff, who briefly became happier. What, you too? Sophia whispered, so, someone was talking about us. Returning to Naruto and the clone company as the clone was about to dispel itself, it heard the guard say something about the possible location of the war maiden. The clone pondered, the boss really needs to learn about this, and then vanished in silence. After receiving the memories of one of his clones, Naruto took a different route. His other clone's memories followed soon after. He was going to visit the ramen stand, but who knows? Ellen might be there. Unconsciously, he was searching for the only woman he knew with snow-white hair, but he didn't know why. Now, he was on his way to the castle in the middle of the town and was soon running up and down its walls in search of the room where he would find the people he was looking for. He soon discovered a window that led to a steaming bathroom, and he decided he needed a wash regardless of whether the water was a gender-specific bath or not. Thus, he wrapped his clothing and equipment in a water-resistant paper scroll and sealed it in a seal he carried on the underside of his arm before starting to wash. At least he was unaware of what was happening outside the restroom. In the meantime, outside the restroom, the male and female of the restrooms were switched, a prank that Ellen and, strangely, Mila intended to play on Tigra and Lim. Ellen and a few of the castle maids were trying and succeeding at not laughing. However, the sign on the female side was left in place. Tigra was in the changing room, preparing to take a bath, while Lim was already in the other bathroom, enjoying the warm water. Ellen and Mila went to the women's changing rooms to undress shortly after the signs were switched. Alongside Tigra, unaware of what awaited him beyond, Tigra followed the signs to the male bathroom. Lim was about to leave the restroom when he opened the door and walked straight into him. They were too shocked to move or even talk, and they couldn't have since one of their mouths was covering the others. Hormones took over before either of them realized what was happening. They didn't realize they were approaching the bath until they fell into it together. This brought them back to reality, and Tigra didn't exactly have a good ending because Lim had to feel embarrassed. They were both unaware of the figure vanishing from the open door. Alongside Ellen as she made her way to the unoccupied restroom, Ellen was laughing. It wasn't until she sat down on the bath's stairs that she realized the figure was already inside. But she was noticed by the other person. You know, a voice whispered from right next to her ear, causing her to jump and yell out in cute surprise. Pranking others is my job, and you did a poor job at this one. Before Naruto could finish, Ellen jumped on him and planted a hot, passionate kiss on his lips, expressing her feelings to him. The word meant being crucial. That would be the first time someone gave me a kiss as a form of simple greeting, Naruto stated to her. Ellen was shocked by his misinterpretation and looked for signs of deceit and mischief on his face, but she couldn't find any. When she got off of him, she saw the scars on his body, which were pale in comparison to the red skin from the water. Oh, you have got to be fucking joking, she thought, shocked by yet another failure. So, now that I have found you, mind telling me what has happened while I was away? She replied to Naruto. When she tried to use her breasts to wash his back, Naruto asked her why, assuming that the heat of the water was the reason for her full body flush. Ellen told Naruto everything that had happened, but he didn't realize that most of it went in one ear and out the other. Naruto only remembered the essential details and nothing else. She informed him about Olga and expressed surprise that he was still able to walk after all the harm she had caused him, following Naruto's brief report on his actions. She then inquired as to whether he understood what love was, growing increasingly ashamed as she did so. Love, isn't that the bond between family members that keeps them together? Replied Naruto. Isn't it also what girls claim to their driving force when they try to impress a teme with a large stick up his ass? Or why a girl would throw herself at an enemy she knows she cannot beat? When he responded, Ellen almost choked on her own words. Naruto briefly described Sasuke and his academy fangirls, as well as Hinata's heroic intervention to save him from pain just before his arrival in this world. The first one is part of it, though I don't know what the hell you mean with the other two, he said. Ellen chose to explain what love was to him, and she should have known that Naruto would misinterpret her once more. However, neither of them realized that she had sown a seed in his soul that would soon grow quickly after finding a way into his thick, dense skull. In the meantime, in the other restroom, although Tigra still had enough self-control to keep his bathing towel from being taken away, Lim lost hers while attempting to vent her embarrassment, and neither of them really cared at the moment. Tigra had survived Lim's embarrassment venting by catching her wrists in his own, but the residual hormones took over both of them once more. Following the most recent makeout session, Lim remarked, "We have to keep this a secret." Tigra said, "Agreed, who knows what Naruto and Ellen would do if they found out," and both of them shuddered. The new voice startled them both, saying, "And if you two don't go and find yourselves a room, they will very soon find out about this. Honestly, if you continue here, those two won't be the only ones who find out." For a few hours only, the two saw a crystal-tipped spear emerge from the steam in front of them, followed by long, free-falling light blue hair. Naruto and Ellen are back. "Hey, did you know that that blue spear-wielding girl is also in this castle?" replied Naruto. "I think she may be in the other bathroom." When Ellen realized she might have unintentionally condemned Tigra and her best friend to a very icy and frigid fate, her heart briefly stopped. After a while, Ellen had big fires built around the ice to start the defrosting process after she somehow managed to get the big chunk of ice with the two trapped people inside out of the pseudo-freezer room. However, Naruto then showed up and took a close look at the ice. Ellen said, "Any ideas, Naruto?" She and everyone else in the room, including Mila, jumped back in horror as Naruto cried out in a strained voice before repeatedly hitting his head against the ice and saying, "Think," each time. After a dozen thinks, the ice started to break, much to Mila's and everyone else's surprise. The person who created the crack was the only one who failed to notice. Think, bang think, crack, was the final one, and the block broke apart, leaving the two previously trapped figures behind. Naruto questioned, "What just happened?" Every spectator had sweat drops as large as their heads. Chapter 9. Revelations in the Hunter. When Naruto woke up the following morning, he was shocked to see how much of what he called crap and useful stuff were being sold in the market district. He classified the following as crap, with Naruto's thoughts in parenthesis afterward. Decorative weapons. This stuff isn't as useful as a toothpick. Big coin bags. Do people want to get their money stolen? Exquisite clothes. How the hell is anyone supposed to move in that? Stiletto boots. What the devil are they? Fragrant lotions and soap, what a stench. Paintings of unfamiliar objects. Size scribble art is more interesting than that. Caged animals. Well, Mila had to assist the other three in keeping him restrained until he calmed down, and then she helped out by purchasing a baby fox for Naruto. In addition to other things. When Naruto first saw the paintings, they were in Konoha. Root attempted to take over the leadership while Konoha was in the midst of a coup. Sai was about to apply an ink sealing technique to the entire council, including Tsunade, per Danzo's orders when he sneezed, launching the ink seal at Danzo, who had no time to duck. Naruto is back. Among the items Naruto deemed useful were instant ramen. Naruto used a gold coin to purchase as much as he could and then requested that it be brought to the castle for him. The baby fox that the others had purchased for him. To the stall vendors and the others' surprise, it had taken a liking to Naruto right away. A food vendor. Naruto chose not to call her out on the bullshit after Mila tried some soup and went on to eat 3 more bowls of it after Ellen and Naruto teased her about it. Weapons dealers. One of whom argued with Naruto about the quality of his weapons and made the worst mistake by wagering that if Naruto's sword could cut through his best sword, he would receive a gold coin, which he would then use to purchase the ramen above. Armor dealers. Where they currently reside. After examining some of the vendors' inventory, Naruto gestured toward an item that seemed strange to him. His late godfather would have been proud to wear that item of apparel. He said, "What is that?" The vendor replied, "Armor, what else would it be?" When Ellen and, surprisingly, Lim started rolling around on the floor laughing, Naruto turned around and asked again, "A hunter's outfit?" With his back turned, Tigra hoped no one could see that he was blushing. He might have imagined Lim or Tita wearing that outfit. 1. As the vendor muttered, "For women hunting for men, Naruto joked, "Do you have a size that will fit the short one behind me?" With her small size, she may have problems finding someone. Ellen started laughing so much that she was having trouble breathing, and Mila was being urged to kill Naruto by 99.9% of her senses, with the 0.1% being that she didn't want to traumatize the young children present. Unfortunately not, but if her getup showed a little more skin, it would be just as effective as that other getup. The vendor responded, unfortunately she doesn't have much to show at the moment. Mila. 49.9% kill the vendor. 50% kill Naruto. To everyone's surprise, Naruto said, I know a few people who were smaller in many areas than her who would kill to have a body like hers, until he added, now that I think about it, they were all taller than her and they were all fangirls, so most of them would actually just go for the molehills. Vendor. Pardoned. Mila. Kill the blonde asshole, 100%. The sounds of the feminine roars of anger could be heard in the fields and throughout the town. A few days later Ellen whispered, that damn Thénardier. Unlike his son, he knows how to think. She stood in front of a large map that depicted both Brune and Zhcted, along with Lim, Tigra, and Naruto. Naruto questioned, so that Ice Queen is siding with Thénardier, too? Ellen stated without seeming the least bit disappointed, she is. Tigra questioned, you are going to fight her? You have no idea how long I have waited for this opportunity, Ellen laughed. Lim inquired, what are you planning, Eleonora-sama? Ellen gave her a sly smile. Somewhere else a shadowy figure declared, our team has been killed, the targets are still alive. Another said, and apparently a powerful warrior has joined them. A third said, send 3 more teams after them. The 2 of them said, right away, leader, together. A few days later, once more, Naruto was extremely bored. Why? Ellen had forbade him from participating in the initial conflict with Mila. As a result, he had to observe the battle between the 2 armies from the sidelines. Man, the lessons in the academy were more interesting than this, Naruto grumbled. Okay, perhaps the expression, bored out of his mind, was too weak for the state he was in. He simply reclined and started observing the clouds. He murmured to himself, Shikamaru, is this why you constantly watch clouds? 'Cause the clouds really are interesting. Returning to Konoha, Shikamaru abruptly said, troublesome, while out on a date with Temari. What is? Inquired Temari. I feel like Naruto is actually being lazy for once, she replied, everyone knows that is my job, troublesome damn it. Naruto is back. Naruto must have fallen asleep because he was lying on top of Ellen with a knife to her throat when he woke up. He was still unaware of where his hand was. Naruto, Ellen said, do you think you could maybe get off me? Naruto complied with her request and assisted her in standing up, saying, oh, sorry. One of Ellen's army commanders questioned, where the hell did you hide that knife? To the man's horror and the laughter of the others at the easy yet powerful trick, Naruto pulled the knife from behind his ear and said, here. So, Naruto said, assuming a serious demeanor, what did I miss? Ellen remarked, one hell of a fight. Naruto thought, recalling what little he remembered, wouldn't call what you guys did a fight. He saw people swinging swords like crazy, archers shooting waves of arrows, said arrows landing in a small area, blaring horns, and a lot of meaningless shouting. Naruto inquired, and what is the next step? When Naruto yawned, Ellen ceased talking. Tomorrow when we engage again, I'll engage Mila in single com. He said, sorry, you lost me at Agen. Ellen, Lim, and the majority of the senior officers were either sweating profusely or had twitching eyebrows. Lim remarked, let me try. Tomorrow, we are going to kick the enemy's ass. Naruto pounded his open left hand with his right fist like a hammer. He said, oh, so that is the plan. Bertrand questioned, how were you able to do that, Limli Shidono? Lim remarked, this is the first time for everything. Naruto started to say, so, do you guys want me to, but Ellen cut him off. She said sharply, you are sitting this one out as well. Slumping, Naruto said, you're mean, she might get really upset and scare the living daylights out of him, so he had better keep her in the dark about the clones he sent to infiltrate the enemy army. That evening Ellen's army had constructed a makeshift watchtower, and Naruto was sitting atop it, meditating. Ellen had just escaped him from another of her strange experiments. He had no idea what else they were. Really, attempting to perform cardiopulmonary resuscitation on me while I am conscious. He asked himself, what is wrong with her? And hold on, why am I thinking this way about her? Just as he was about to switch into sage mode, memories from one of the clones on infiltration duty began to flood his mind. After going over the memories, Naruto thought, So, the little one is withdrawing her troops to her citadel. I need to keep the clones a secret, so I'd better not tell Ellen. He eventually got up and vanished into the campsite's shadows. Not long after, as Ellen was saying this, Naruto arrived outside the command tent and chose not to enter just yet. Mila has always been strong at defensive warfare. She is widely regarded as the best amongst the war maidens. This despite her personality being so aggressive. Naruto thought, I wouldn't say she is aggressive, she doesn't come close to an angry Sakura-chan. That is the epitome of aggression. I didn't see Ludmila-sama at the forefront too often, said Lim. Tigra sighed and said, I'd like to avoid seeing it if possible. With a hint of humor in her voice, Ellen stated, hey, she cannot beat me in field warfare, that is my speciality. By the way, do either of you know where Naruto is? I haven't seen or heard of him since you tried kissing him earlier, Lim replied. Hold on, kissing is what a boy and a girl do when they truly like each other, isn't it? Naruto pondered. Yes, I am aware that she likes me, but I seriously doubt that she feels that way about me. Hey, words may usually be more powerful than a sword, but not with this him. Ellen objected. If I have learned anything about him, it is that actions speak louder than words. Tigra said, and he has the unique ability to misunderstand anything spoken to him. Ellen nodded back. Naruto wanted to yell, hey, I'm not that bad, but he refrained because he felt a connection to Tigra. Well, let's get some shut-eye. Tomorrow we have yet another battle ahead of us. Ellen replied. The other two concurred. The following day, they what? Ellen's scream woke up the entire camp. A brief flashback. Naruto shook the woman who was still asleep and said, Ellen, wake up. She mumbled, that's it, Naruto, right there. He thought, she talks in her sleep. I don't want to know what she is dreaming about. Then he recalled a trick he had learned from his perverted godfather, which is said to have a 95% chance of waking up any woman. He said, oh, well, here goes nothing. Plan B. And gave her breast a firm groping. The technique was literally a screaming success, as Ellen woke up with a high-pitched, startled scream. Naruto called out to her, yo, Ellen. He went on before she could react or even comprehend what had transpired. Just thought I'd let you know that small one's army is not going to fight your army. After a few seconds, they what? A brief flashback concludes. After 30 minutes after scouting the battlefield, Lim reported, the Olmut's army has completely withdrawn their forces. It appears the enemy is headed into the Tatra Mountains. When Ellen heard the news, she slammed her fist into the floor. She roared, we've been taken. Are you saying that Ludmila intended to do this from the start? Replied Tigra. Ellen whispered, the battle yesterday must have been intended to hear us out. She yelled, have our forces moved towards Tatra Citadel. Naruto stepped forward and exclaimed, Naruto, go ahead of our forces and scout the area. He responded, roger that, and then sped off. He unintentionally sent a tiny piece of crushed ice flying from his feet straight into her maid uniform, where it became lodged in her cleavage, as he passed Tita, who was presently delivering food for Konoha. Naruto named the baby fox in honor of his hometown. As the cold water trickled down between her breasts, Naruto heard her scream in fear and terror, and he stopped at the edge of camp. The heck, he asked himself, later on in the day. As Naruto looked around the citadel, he thought, there is only one route towards the citadel from this side. The defenders can concentrate their fire on a relatively small area of land because the flanks are shielded by sheer cliffs. Ellen's army may be a little tricky to get into, but it will be easy. Through a makeshift telescope, Naruto started to focus on the defender. He looked at the walls that ran along the cliffs and said, 2, 3, about 4 dozen guards on this side alone. The small one sure knows how to prevent a surprise attack. Oh, what's this? 1, 2, only 3 guards on each of the side walls. Does she want me to infiltrate through there? He glanced away from the citadel down the valley. He could see Ellen's army moving in a systematic approach. The following day Naruto gazed bewilderedly at the strange devices known as siege engines that the Light Marie's army had constructed. According to what he understood, the siege towers would enable their forces to ascend the walls without having to breach the gate, which was to be broken down by a battering ram. Though, according to Naruto, they were simply going to unleash a headbutt happy goat upon the gate at that name, while the catapults would launch massive boulders against the battlements and the towers instead. Looking at the catapults, Naruto remarked, Bushy Brows and Bushy Brows Sensei would have a field day with these cannon bolts. When he tried to name the siege engine, the engineers laughed. He was eager to watch them in action. Fast forward to the battle. It would be accurate to say that Naruto was disappointed. The mangonels on top of the walls demolished the towers with massive boulders just as they were halfway there. When the ram arrived at the gate, it was covered with oil and then a torch that was burning. The rocks that struck the wall hardly left a crack, and the catapults, at least, were somewhat useful, but they hardly ever hit their target. To put it briefly, the attack was unsuccessful. That night, damn that potato. The way this is going, the battle will just get drawn out, Ellen yelled. The cold is already numbing our soldiers' spirits. She started to babble about a number of plans, all of which were rejected as suicide missions by Tigra, Lim, and Naruto. Well, mostly just the first two. Tigra eventually made a suggestion, but Ellen rejected it because it might take days to complete. In response to Naruto's question about why she disagreed, Lim said, I am not going to let the one I love, before going atomic and Tigra turning as pink as his hair. To Ellen's delight, Naruto grinned and started questioning the two, saying, oh ho, what have we here? 5 minutes later, the grilling came to an end. Well, being in love is not forbidden. Don't worry, I don't like pranking people because of that, Naruto replied. Tigra questioned, then why did you ask those questions? Lim, who had calmed down to a full cheek blush, went atomic again when he said, because A, you tried hiding your relationship when the entire army already knew, and B, seriously, if I hadn't grilled you, it would have been Ellen, and I believe Lim knows where that would have gone. Tigra said, that bad, huh? To her. Now, Lim, Naruto started, then walked up to her and whispered in her ear, I'll tell everyone about your happiness at collecting teddy bears if you don't let Tigra scout the area and find a second route into the citadel. Lim instantly said, I take back my vote, Tigra can go, in the hopes that Naruto wouldn't do that. At that, Ellen appeared deceived, but she eventually gave in. Early the following day Ellen said, Tigra, ready to go? He replied, yeah. But Lim interrupted him, brandishing some sort of cloak. It turned out to be a bear skin, with the head transformed into a hood and the forelimbs into sleeves for convenience. Before Ellen abruptly pushed her, Lim remarked, I once heard about a village that dresses in animal skins when going out hunting and traveling. Also, this will hide your identity somewhat. When she staggered and her lips met Tigra's, the kiss became more than just accidental, after 2 or 3 heartbeats. After the two parted ways, Naruto said, Tigra, and handed him a tiny pouch filled with tiny balls. Where I come from, these are called soldier pills, and they are basically food and energy in one package. Eat them only when you need to. Tigra nodded, not understanding what he was talking about because neither she nor Lim or Ellen had ever heard of soldier pills. Tigra's brief reconnaissance mission is identical to that in the anime. While Tigra, Ors, was conversing with Mila in the cave, Naruto said, why don't you let me fight? To Ellen. Because you are our trump card. Mila doesn't know about your fighting prowess and I had rather not risk the men and women finding out about your former line of work. Ellen responded. Yes, everyone knows you are a fine swordsman, but there have already been some rumors about you, stating that the way you move is nothing like that of an ordinary swordsman, it is more like someone's footsteps who doesn't want to be heard. Naruto let out a sigh. Sorry, but my training has been forced into muscle memory and beyond. I doubt I'll be able to not move like that for extended periods of time, Naruto exhaled. But Ellen adopted a beseeching tone as she said, but nothing. Please, Naruto, like Lim, I cannot let the one I love get into danger. Hang on, Naruto said, raising one hand while holding his head in the other. Ellen stepped forward and covered his mouth with hers to silence him. You are telling me that those times you tried practicing your CPR and mouth-to-mouth skills on me were actually you trying to say that you love me? What, she said. A moment later, she took a small step back. Just shut up. Promise me that you will not take part in the fighting, she exclaimed. She didn't notice the crossed fingers he had behind his back when Naruto nodded after he had recovered from his shock. After Ellen, Tigra, and the 100 men departed to attack the back door, time passed. Naruto was sprinting toward the citadel along the cliff face. As he arrived at the spot directly beneath the walls, he thought grimly, sorry, Ellen-chan. But that is a promise I just couldn't make. He started running straight up, using chakra to stay on the cliff face. Overcoming the walls was simpler than he had anticipated, and he vanished into the interior shadows of the buildings. He moved quietly to the rear entrance and, to kill time, started meditating. A few hours prior to dawn when a huge explosion shattered the gate, Naruto was literally blown out of his sleep. Ellen, Tigra, and the soldiers were then seen hurrying through the opening. However, He had to give the Olmutz soldiers credit because of how quickly they reacted. Either Mila foresaw this sneak attack or it was a part of their training. Naruto didn't notice the 21 or so shadowy figures moving silently among the shadows towards the battle because he was preoccupied with the battle at one gate and his clones had died during the previous engagement. He had no idea that things would soon become either extremely complex or extremely interesting. Ellen yelled, "Charge!" as she sprinted directly into the heart of the Olmutz line, blazing a trail of blood through them. The Olmutz soldiers were frightened by the terrifying accuracy with which Tigra was shooting arrows behind her. And rushing past Tigra, the roughly 100 soldiers Ellen had brought along, shouting battle cries as they crashed into the Olmutz lines. The Olmutz formations were already at their breaking point because of Ellen's semi-rampage among their ranks, and when the Leitmerit's troops engaged them, the battle descended into a ferocious melee. During this battle, Tigra had no trouble at all shooting arrows with his deadly accuracy. None at all. Later, only a few soldiers would complain about arrows flying so close to their necks that they felt the wind from the arrows as they flew past. From his vantage point, up Naruto watched it all, wondering how strategies like this could help him win fights. Where were the flanking maneuvers when they were charging directly into the enemy lines? Where was the group project? Where had the ramen gone to? Hold on, why am I thinking about ramen at the moment? He reflected to himself. Shaking his head, he went back to fighting. He could see at least 3 routes to outflank the Olmutz soldiers even from his current position. Their heavy armor will cause them to sink to the bottom of the water channel, but it won't matter. Cross the water channel to their far left and flank them from there. Leap over everything and strike them from behind. Oh, I see. They're not shinobi. Never mind. Even with all the heavy armor they're wearing, running along the walls can't be that difficult. However, this citadel belongs to an ice queen, so they might just slip on the ice, so it doesn't matter. Naruto witnessed the Olmutz troops reorganize on his side of a bridge, which was obstructed by a flag, as the battle abruptly came to a halt. A huge explosion shook the citadel before Naruto could take action after he became aware of the 20 presences encircling the battlefield. On the battlefield, a while back when the Olmutz soldiers abruptly withdrew across the channel bridge, past a woman wearing sky blue, and reformed in orderly ranks, albeit with fewer ranks because the brief skirmish had reduced their numbers. A number of Leitmerit's soldiers yelled, "The fuck?" The woman wearing blue said, "Eleonora," loudly enough to be heard throughout the citadel. As her own soldiers gathered behind her, Ellen exclaimed, "Ludmila Lowry." The tension in the air informed the soldiers on both sides to GTHAFT as the 2 war maidens prepared to fight. They had just created enough room for the 2 strong women to engage in combat before they did, sending sparks and shockwaves flying wherever their weapons collided. The archers who attempted to shoot Ellen were being shot down by Tigra. "Stand back," yelled Mila. "This one's mine." After another separation between the 2 Venadis, Mila started chanting. Mila exclaimed, "Freeze through even the skies, Siero Zam Kapha." When she struck the floor with the butt of her spear, dozens of ice stalactites exploded from the wooden bridge floor between her and Ellen, but Ellen leapt over them. Ellen screamed, "Mow down, air and all. Lay Admos," and attacked the shorter Venadis with a compressed ball of swirling air. To avoid Ellen's attack's area effect, Mila leapt far to the side. "Iceberg!" she exclaimed as her spear abruptly reached out and touched the channel's water, creating a massive ice trench. Ellen was standing on a nearby roof when Mila looked up at her. "How does it feel for you, who is always looking down on others, to now have someone look down on you?" Ellen responded with a smirk. Mila yelled, "You have an insolent mouth," and a huge pillar of ice crashed into the roof where Ellen was standing. Ellen simply leapt to the ground, but it was ice level. Shortly after, the 2 fought closely once more, but this time there was a difference. Mila yelled, "Run her through, Lavias," as she got ready to thrust her spear forward. Ellen simultaneously yelled, "Slice her to pieces, Arifar," as she readied herself to deliver a devastating slash. The reason the soldiers created so much space was evident from the explosion that caused their separate attacks to collide. The explosion's maximum width was 150 alsans. Alongside Tigra exclaimed, "So this is a fight between war maidens." Some of the soldiers in the area could only agree with him. Alongside Naruto. Naruto thought, about B-rank attacks. Amazing outcomes, though. He noticed movement out of the corner of his eye and saw the unidentified figures moving around. Naruto was ready for the worst, even if it meant revealing his identity. Below, a few light merit soldiers descended the crater's wall by rappelling. One of them called out to Ellen, "Lady War Maiden, where?" Ellen yelled, "Stay back," which caused them to stop. "This will be over soon. Keep out of this." Mila said, "You're right. Let's put an end to this." Ellen charged with a war cry, only to have one of her soldiers charge at them. "Who are you?" Ellen exclaimed, failing to recognize him by name. The hood dropped, exposing the face of a man with a bald head and a tattoo of chain links beneath his left eye. "Serish?" Mila cried in astonishment and surprise, a look that Ellen mirrored. Tigra's final arrow hit the man in the temple, killing him just as he was about to hit one of them. However, the relief experienced by the war maidens was short-lived, as 20 additional figures appeared on the floor surrounding them and charged as well. However, 20 more figures then appeared between them and their target or targets, blocking their weapons with swords. One of the younger characters questioned, "You call yourselves shinobi?" "What of it?" inquired one of the Serish. Another figure remarked, "I thought the shinobi of this world were supposed to be more skilled than this." The first unidentified individual repeated, "Shinobi are feared for their combat skills, but you lot are just plain pathetic and cowardly. Give up now and this cloak is getting annoying." Everyone was even more perplexed by this final detail, at least until the more recent figures all tore off their cloaks. "Naruto!" exclaimed Ellen, startled. "You?" exclaimed Mila. "There are more of you?" Naruto said nothing, choosing instead to concentrate on the target of his blade. The truth in Mila's yell was gradually absorbed by all. The others agreed with Naruto when he said, "Now, that's better." They were all dressed in khaki combat pants and a dark green shirt without sleeves. He had black sandals on his feet. His sword was strapped to his back. The Serish leader, or at least Naruto thought he was, demanded, "Who are you?" Each Naruto drew their sword and introduced themselves, saying, "My name and title is Naruto Uzumaki of the Silent Steppe. And as for who I am, how about you try and pry that information from me, you shinobi wannabes?" The assassins from Serish were furious. The person with the shortest chain tattoo yelled angrily, "Nobody, not even the gods, ever insults those trained as shinobi and lives to tell about it." Others gave nods of agreement. However, before they could act, Naruto and his clones charged and engaged them in a fierce melee. The Serish assassins were soon outclassed by Naruto's superior swordsmanship, but they were able to save their lives by playing dirty, which is what they do best. Mila started by saying, "Ellen," forcing the white-haired woman to turn to face the blue one. "Do you have any idea just what is going on?" One of the Narutos yelled before Ellen could respond. "I am Uzumaki Naruto, hero of the Hidden Leaf, seeker of peace, and I am a..." Naruto was about to finish when a red cloud engulfed him, instantly igniting his throat, nostrils, and eyes. As his 19 clones were caught in similar bombs, memories of them flooded his mind. When the real Naruto muttered, "Futon. Daitopa," a wind just crashed onto the ground, creating a high-pressure area that blew the pepper smoke away from him and the surrounding area. The Serish assassins, the soldiers, and the two Venadis were all taken aback by the abrupt disappearance of 19 of the figures and the sudden blast of wind surrounding the real Naruto. Everyone exclaimed, "Whaa!" at the unexpected turn of events. Ellen inquired, "What happened?" As Naruto explained to her, "You are not the only one with control over wind, Ellen. However, the way we use the power of the wind is different." "Huh?" Ellen questioned, perplexed. A Serish assassin charged at Naruto before he could say anything else, and his blade abruptly started to glow blue. It was the attacker's fault that they ignored it until it was too late. As if it had never been there, Naruto's katana cut through the man's sword and then continued through his neck, sending his head flying. No one moved or made a sound for a while. "They say that a shinobi is to be feared by his enemies," Naruto uttered, his words resonating through the citadel's silence. "You have absolutely no idea how true those words are right now." Mila inquired, "What do you mean?" Ellen was the one who responded, not Naruto. "What he means, Mila, is that that statement applies to him as much as it does for the other shinobi." Mila turned to her and said, "You mean, that he is one as well?" "Yes, and no," was Ellen's response. Naruto attacked the next Serish shinobi without saying a word. Ellen paused as she observed the destruction Naruto was causing to the Serish shinobi. "Yes, where he comes from. He was trained to be a shinobi, but," she said. It was pointless to block Naruto's attacks because the katana was encased in the wind chakra. "Where he comes from, shinobi are trained different ideals and fighting styles," Ellen concluded. Most of the Serish assassins had either been killed or injured by Naruto by this point. Mila's eyes widened as she gazed at Ellen. How do you know all this? Naruto told me shortly after he joined my service. Ellen responded. At first I didn't believe him, but after showing me some of the things he could do, such as him moving very fast and jumping very far, not to mention creating weapons of extremely high quality in less than 1/10 of the time it takes a specialized blacksmith to create one of equal quality, well, it became rather hard to not believe it. Mila questioned, then what about the wind just now? We might never fully comprehend him, Ellen remarked, glancing at Naruto, who had just defeated the final Serish assassin. Ellen noticed a sudden movement and turned in time to witness Naruto being shot with a blowpipe by one of the wounded assassins. When Ellen saw Naruto drop to his knees with one hand reaching back and drawing out the dart, her heart briefly stopped beating. Ellen turned in time to see the wounded assassin aiming the blowpipe at her after hearing a noise, but he stopped when a throwing knife knocked it from his grasp. Naruto mumbled, sorry, but, and stood up again as if nothing had occurred. Thanks to my upbringing, I have a near immunity to poisons and venoms. He turned around, demonstrating that the poison had no effect on him at all. Instead of being apprehended and questioned, the assassin killed himself by growling and biting down on a false tooth. There was silence for a while, then, growl, everyone looked around, thinking there was a lion inside the citadel, but then they heard Naruto growl again. Man, I am hungry, anyone got any ramen? Asked he. Through the floor, Naruto felt the force of hundreds of soldiers face-planting. He simply scratched the back of his head and laughed. Sword off after everyone had calmed down. Something struck Mila as she observed the Serish with the arrow in his head. Eyeing Tigra, she muttered, Ors, Mila and Tigra's dialogue is identical to that in canon. In the matter of the Brunnish civil upheaval, I will no longer assist Duke Tenadir in the slightest bit, Mila yelled at her soldiers. Almost everyone let out a sigh of relief. Unexpectedly and silently, Naruto materialized behind her, holding a tiny piece of ice, and rubbing it against her bare back, beginning at the small of her back and working his way upward. Ellen laughed at that, and Mila screamed out in terror. Both the Lightmerits and the Olmut soldiers laughed at the wordplay when Naruto remarked, you know, as someone who should be immune to the cold, you sure are able to feel a chill crawling up your spine. Ellen changed the topic and said, so, Naruto, now that your secret is out, what will you do? Wasn't much of a secret, I am just relieved that I no longer have to hold back anymore, replied Naruto. With an angry tone at the last word, Mila questioned, so you really are a shinobi? Ellen became enraged and started to draw her sword, but Naruto intervened. Naruto started off by saying, yes, I am a shinobi, but I wasn't raised to be like the ones you all know and fear. Yes, the shinobi in my world are trained to assassinate. Yes, we are trained to kill. Yes, we are capable of mass destruction. But most of us follow a strong moral code as well as strong beliefs. I thought Ellen explained all that already. With an angry tone, Mila questioned, like what? We are mercenaries by trade, but also soldiers and warriors, said Naruto. Gazing up at the sky and recalling one of the few lessons from Kakashi-sensei that he was able to retain in his memory, Naruto began. Those who disobey their orders are scum. But those who abandon their comrades are even worse than scum. Ellen and Mila nodded in agreement with his statement, as did every other soldier in the area. I don't blame you if you no longer trust me, but a part of what makes us shinobi is our ability to deceive our opponents and sometimes even our allies. Naruto glanced at Ellen. The only one until now to know of my former employment is Ellen, who even though knowing about it refused to change and even asked me to keep it a secret, but there is still a lot that even she doesn't know about me. He returned his gaze to Mila. And I know that your dragon gear can alert you of danger. If I were like the shinobi of this world, do you think I would be able to talk to you like this? You said, this world, Mila explained. Naruto gave a nod. What the fuck are you talking about? I am not of this world. I should have died in my home world but I ended up in this world, said Naruto. Prove it. Mila was silenced when a large number of Narutos appeared out of nowhere. Name me a Magish, Maki, Magi thingy that can create clones of him or herself. Naruto replied. Or one that can do this. He grabbed some metal fragments and used chakra to adhere them to his body like glue. Ellen, asked Mila. Ellen practically yelled, no, I am not sharing him with you. Mila questioned, who said anything about sharing him? I wanted to ask if you could let me. Ellen interrupted her once more, and the two resumed their argument. As this was going on, Naruto had seized Tigra, a few Lightmerits, and a few Olmut soldiers. He had also opened ale for the soldiers and juice for Tigra, and the two of them watched the comedy show in which Ellen and Mila were arguing. Pav Shift, storyteller Ellen, Naruto, Lim, Tigra, and the Light Merit's forces were permitted to return to Brune after Mila publicly declared her neutrality in the civil unrest there, as she had promised. But Thenardier had already foreseen this and was putting backup plans in place. One of those schemes concerned a certain knight who was posted to the kingdom's western boundary. Roland's introduction is identical to that in Episode 6 of the anime. Pav Shift, typical a message from the capital was being read by Roland. Olivier, his friend and the second in command of the Navarre Knights, said, "What is it, Roland?" Roland replied, "An order from His Majesty, to put down the insurgent." Olivier questioned, "The insurgent? Who does he mean?" Roland said, "The Count of Alsace, Tigravormud Vorn. We are heading out as soon as the Saxtine invasion has been stopped." After a month, and a few days, together with 5,000 knights, Tigra had made his way back to Brune, determined to do everything in his power to defend his homeland. Tigra's new army was given permission by Hughes Augur to establish their headquarters on his land. The army's size has increased over the last 2 weeks as more minor lords who supported Tigra's cause have joined them. HQ tent for Tigra's army. Ellen said, "Okay, Lim, go ahead and say it." The blonde girl said, "Silver, meteor, can we not do this?" According to Ellen, Tita, the maid said, "The silver meteor storm, with ease." Naruto awoke from his slumber, which had begun as soon as this conversation began, 30 minutes ago, and exclaimed, "Huh? The silver meteor storm?" Lim exclaimed, she said, "The silver meteor storm." Ellen jumped at the chance to make fun of her friend by asking, that wasn't that bad, was it?" With a sigh of defeat, Lim blushed, realizing that she had just doomed any and all complaints she had about the newly formed army's name. Tigra extended his arm and grasped Lim's hand. Tigra swore he had a skull fracture the next morning because of how bad his hangover was, and Lim wasn't much better. 2 weeks ago, they made their relationship official in public, and the soldiers celebrated by throwing a party right away. Even worse, Naruto decided to practice creating more explosives, as he called them that morning. And to top it all off, Naruto was able to get almost everyone under the table drunk. The only people who weren't were those who had already had a drink before he joined, and everyone, including Ellen, was angry and amazed that he didn't get a hangover. Nothing significant has happened in Naruto's relationship with Ellen, despite the fact that he was gradually learning to read his own emotions. Furthermore, although this message was primarily aimed at women, Ellen had effectively declared to the world that Naruto was hers and that he was no longer for sale. Ellen muttered something about having forgotten about that after Naruto said that if that were the case, she would also technically be off the market for the men. While the majority of the unmarried women were extremely envious of Ellen for keeping Naruto to herself and not sharing, many of the men were silently berating the blonde for his good fortune in having a, quote, smoking hot babe, end quote, pursuing him. However, neither would they. "Sir Tigravormud," Rurik exclaimed, standing at the tent's entrance. "Forgive me for interrupting your important meeting. There's been another dispute." Tigra questioned, "Again? What's the reason this time?" He and Lim stood up. She only wanted to make sure Tigra didn't get into trouble with other women, but she didn't have to. Rurik stated, "The thing is, I'm not entirely sure." Tigra and Lim said, "We'll be right back." They were following Rurik. "Yeah. You're used to this by now, so settle it quickly and come back," Ellen replied. Tita hurried to catch up with the two. When they were by themselves, Ellen went to lie down next to Naruto, who was sleeping against one of the storage chests. Since Ellen was using Naruto as a pillow and Naruto was treating her like a teddy bear, the two of them were sound asleep when Tigra, Lim, Tita, and Rurik returned, suggesting that Naruto's ability to sleep anywhere must have been contagious. Tigra muttered, "And you say that I sleep a lot," which caused Tita to laugh while Rurik and Lim smiled. "At least he is able to stand up when the sun rises," said Lim. Tigra asked, causing Tita to giggle once more. "When the sun rises or when Ellen brings him his morning pot of ramen?" she asked. "You know, seeing Naruto dono like this, I find it very hard to believe that he is a shinobi," Rurik said. When one of Naruto's kunai struck the tent pole directly in front of Rurik's face, he stopped speaking. He rubbed the sleep from his eyes and mumbled, "Oh, my reflexes must be getting rusty for me to miss the person spewing bullshit about me." 1. Ellen complained and drowsily glanced around, asking, "Did you have to move? I was having such a nice dream." "Oh, you finished with the problem, what was it anyway?" 1. Rurik didn't need to know that Naruto was bluffing there. Chapter 11. After a while. The shape of a cloud was the reason for the fight, Hughes said, trying not to laugh. Oh, that's funny. He, Tigra, and a number of other people were traveling to a nearby trading town to buy supplies and meet with some nobles who wanted to talk to Tigra before committing to his cause. Brune and ZHCTED were an army that was thrown together, so that means more bickering, Tigra replied. Rurik said the sound was interesting and asked Tigra to shoot another one of those whistling arrows the next time there was a fight. Once in the town, Hughes clarified, Sanir is at the center of the villages of this area. Most discussions held between village leaders take place here. Rurik remarked, there seem to be a lot of outsiders here as well. I also hope that we can come by even a little information about the capital, said Tigra. Rurik questioned, then why not ask Naruto to go there? Tigra questioned, do you think Ellen will allow him to go there? We do not know what either Ganelin or Thénardier are up to at the moment, we need him with us. I think the greatest problem would be Lady Eleonora, said Hughes. She is more protective towards Naruto than a mother wolf is towards her newborn pup. That doesn't stop him from causing trouble all the time, said Tigra. There, the others concurred with him. A couple of hours later. Tigra, Hughes, and Rurik stood outside the town hall, talking and watching a blacksmith demonstrate his portable furnace after meeting with the town leadership about buying supplies and the half-dozen nobles who wanted to meet the Brunish archer. Rurik remarked, we finished earlier than I expected. Things went without a hitch. I agree. I half expected Naruto to burst in there and ask for directions to the nearest ramen stand. Good thing he is still back at camp though, said Tigra. Anyway, I wish we could have gotten information about the capital. Hughes remarked, that's a bit of a shame, huh? Rurik said, Augur-sama, what are you going to do now? The elderly man replied, I'll be heading back to my estate. Tigra said, then I'll see you off. Hughes questioned in mock indignation, what are you talking about, young one? Before adding in a much softer tone, this is a rare opportunity. Enjoy yourself before you leave. See? Hughes pointed to the many stores and pubs in the area. Meanwhile, back at the camp, Naruto was lounging in the sun on the grass by a tiny stream. Naruto muttered, recalling the group of soldiers who attempted to beat him to death when he attempted to enter the tent he and Ellen shared. Ellen told me to take it easy for today. Rewind, a woman yelled, hey, you there, as she gestured to Naruto, who was ready to enter his tent. Naruto turned to face the 8 soldiers and said, me? She said, who else, you dumbass? None of them took notice of the tiny tick mark that appeared on Naruto's head. That tent belongs to Lady Eleonora and that swordsman, Nato Uzumaki. With a slight flare of his ki, Naruto stepped towards her and asked, how long have you been here? One of the men stepped between Naruto and the female and remarked, a few weeks now. We know more about this camp than you, newbie. From the corner of Naruto's eye, he saw a crowd forming, enclosing the officers in a large circle, and several officers sitting and observing. Naruto started, but a second male interrupted him by hefting a club. I'll have you know that. When Naruto noticed a number of soldiers approaching with their swords drawn, he raised a hand to signal them to stop. The man with the club said threateningly, trying to intimidate us with saying who you know will not help you in the slightest. His group members concurred with him. Then, as she moved forward in front of the group, another woman spoke. This is not a place for someone like you to be, newbie, she responded. She became enraged when Naruto said, says the one whose brain grew in her breasts rather than her head. She started to say, why don't you just go back to your whore of a mother, but stopped when she felt his hand on her throat and her feet hanging in midair. Her group members recoiled in disbelief, as they hadn't witnessed Naruto's movements. Naruto snarled, let me tell you something. The woman was starting to have breathing problems as the hold tightened around her neck. You and your friends here can insult me all you want, but never insult anyone close to me. Naruto abruptly let her go. Naruto was silenced when a fist struck his face. I'll let you off with a warning for now. Consider yourself, his voice said. A man yelled, shut up you son of a bitch. He was hurled into a nearby stack of crates the next thing he knew. The woman Naruto had grabbed by the neck saw her eyes widen as he easily sidestepped, parried, and retaliated against all of her friends' attacks on him. She asked, who are you? As he chopped the back of the neck to finish off the other female. Naruto introduced himself, saying, name's Naruto Uzumaki. And tell that to your friends when they wake up if you please. The end of the flashback. Naruto was alerted by the sound of rustling leaves, but he sighed when a baby dragon swooped into him from the bushes, causing them to roll into the water. According to Naruto, you're Ellen's pet dragon, Looney. Both of them were drawn to another rustle of leaves, and Looney took off as if she were fleeing something. A female voice said, "Ah, Looney-chan, don't run away." As Naruto turned to face the voice, he had time to A. Identify the woman as Sophia, B. Get a nosebleed, and C. Notice that she was nude, which led to B. He was motionless as she ran through the river without noticing him, tripped over a rock, and fell on top of him. Looney gave them a cute deadpan look as she observed them. Since he was lying beneath her and had blood on his face, Sophia said, Era, are you all right?" "Sophie," exclaimed a second voice. "Oh, whoa," thinking, Naruto recognized the voice as Ellen emerged from the bushes and asked, "Did you find Looney?" Seeing that she at least had something on, even if it wasn't much, Naruto exhaled with relief. Sophia called to her, "Yes, I did." A deadly aura gradually surrounded Ellen's body as she turned and froze. She saw her friend lying naked on top of Naruto, blood on his face, and their bodies in rather suggestive positions. Sophia pointed to the light green baby dragon, whose face was even more deadpan than before, and said, "Look up there." A couple of hours later Sophia said to the pink-haired archer, who had just returned with the supplies, "It's a pleasure to meet you, Sir Tigervormund." She sat on one side of the table, petting a sleeping Looney on her lap, and said, "I am one of the 7 war maidens, Sophia Abertas. Feel free to call me Sophie." Tigra and Lim sat opposite her, while Tita stood off to the side near a small table filled with refreshments. Because she felt like it, Ellen sat between Naruto and Sophie while Naruto and Ellen sat on one of the sides. Tigra returned the greeting, saying, "Tigervormund Vorn. And the pleasure is mine. I must be honest, I didn't expect to see a war maiden with whom Ellen would be able to get along with so well." Tigra cracked a joke. "Out of those war maidens I have encountered thus far," Naruto started to clarify, "she is the only one with whom Ellen doesn't share an antagonistic relationship." Lim inquired, "How many have you met so far?" "Let's see, other than Mila and BB or so here. There was that purple bitch with the oversized farming tool. The bitch with the heterochromatic eyes wielding every sadist's favorite toy, and finally that young child using that lumbering tool that can grow," Naruto replied. 3 additional locations, all in ZHCTED for some reason. Valentina, Liza, and Olga all sneezed at about the same moment and felt like thrashing a certain blonde. Returning to the conversation, "That means that I still have 1 war maiden to meet, I guess," said Naruto. Tita inquired, "What do you mean with BB, and so?" In agreement, the other people in the room turned to face Naruto. "Abbreviations for nicknames for her. Blonde Bimbo, and seriously oversized," said Naruto. Being a bit of an airhead, Sophie naturally took both of those nicknames as compliments. While she wouldn't say it aloud, Tita tacitly concurred with Naruto regarding the 2 nicknames. Ellen inquired curiously, "Oh, and what are your nicknames for the rest of us?" Tita and Lim were starting to feel uneasy about this. "Well, you would probably have been Snowflake," Naruto said, seemingly thinking, while resting his index finger on his chin. Because of the nickname he gave her, Tita threw a jar of water, which Naruto narrowly avoided. Tigra would be Sakura, due to the color of his hair. Tita would be Titty, and Lim would be a SW. "SW?" inquired Lim. "Snowflake wannabe, you dress similar to Ellen don't you?" replied Naruto. "Or would you prefer, ever-growing?" Lim lost it right away. Ellen's constant taunting of her bust size was already awful enough. Knowing what was happening, Sophie laughed. "Anyway," she started, bringing her back into focus, "I am here in Brune on official business. His Majesty has grown impatient of Brune's inexcusable conduct, and I have been ordered to come here as his envoy." "Lady Sophia, might we ask you what sort of response you received from the royal palace?" Lim responded. To put it bluntly, Sophia responded, "It wasn't a very favorable one." Lim questioned, "What do you mean?" "The King of Brune has been taken with illness, and I was not granted an audience." Sophia responded. "All I could do was convey our position." "Your position?" asked Naruto and Tigra. "You asserted that I had only been hired by Tigra, and that the kingdom of ZHCTED was not at all involved?" Ellen inquired. Sophia's voice grew solemn as she said, "Yes, also, I was asked to deliver a message to Sir Tigervormund through you, Ellen." "To me?" inquired Tigra. "We deprive Count Vorn of all authority as a count and a Brunish nobleman after accusing him of treason. After this unrest has subsided, a magistrate will be sent from the royal capital to temporarily place Alsace under His Majesty's authority and allow them to govern themselves. Lim, Tida, and Tigra all gazed at her. Treason? Inquired Tigra. Sir Tigravormud, in time. I believe that a messenger will be sent from the palace to you personally, but perhaps you should ask Sir Moshes for more details, rather than myself. Sophia responded. Sir Moshes? Inquired Tigra. Lim went on to ask, you know Sir Moshes? Sophia started by saying, I got to know him in the capsule, nice. He said he had to return to his own territory first, so he sent me on ahead alone. Tida exclaimed joyfully, thank goodness. Then Lord Moshes is all right. When Tigra got up, excused himself, and left the tent, the joy gave way to bewilderment. Lim and Tida did the same a short while later. I don't like it. Naruto's straightforward statement startled everyone still there out of their reverie. It sounds to me as though something far greater than just a simple struggle is going on here. Naruto elaborated. First Brune invades ZHCTED, an invasion where neither Thenardier nor Gunalong take part in even though it is their duty to do so, resulting in the death of the heir of Brune as well as the loss of a major part of Brune's military prowess. Then one of them sends an army against a small and insignificant province that has little to no strategically advantageous value in the broader war theater. Now we learn that the Brune monarch has suddenly fallen ill and Tigra, someone I respect for his loyalty and dedication to those he cares about, gets accused of treason. This is all too much of a coincidence if you ask me. Naruto turned to Sophia and Ellen. I may just be overthinking things, but I think that either Thenardier or Gunalong are secretly pulling the strings and leading this country to civil war. Why would either of them want to destroy the country? Ellen inquired. From what I heard about Thenardier, he is a proud and powerful warrior and leads the strongest military currently in Brune. He may resort to scorched earth tactics should either Gunalong or Tigra turn out to be the victor. Naruto clarified. And Ganelon? Inquired Sophia. Naruto questioned, is that how one pronounces the name? Anyway, I haven't heard much about him other than he is the secretive type. Thus I cannot as of yet make an estimation about what he may do. Though if I were to hazard a guess, he may just try to escape and then return with a foreign army to conquer Brune. Sophia and Ellen just stared at him for a moment. Ellen nodded as Sophia said, even though I have to agree with some of the things you said, I think you may be overthinking things a bit. Well, I will leave the two of you to catch up on old times. Naruto replied. See you later, Ellen-chan. Ellen came back, saying, yeah, see you later. Naruto wandered around the camp, attempting and failing to walk in a way that would prevent people from shitting their pants when they realized he was right behind them, while Ellen and Sophia discussed where the other Venadis were. He finally found what he was searching for, or more accurately, who. Tigra had a quiver of arrows and a sharpening stone while he sat on a hill outside the camp. He was accompanied by Lim and Tida, who were both making vain attempts to soothe the archer. Tida nearly leapt out of her maid attire as Naruto approached her and gestured for her to follow him. Naruto started to say, Tida-san, I know Tigra-san is feeling down at the moment, but the young maid interrupted him. You don't know anything about how it feels like to be branded a traitor, she growled. Her eyes widened as Naruto said, well, I know how it feels to be called a monster for most of my life. There is also a time when I was sent to prison for a crime I didn't commit. Naruto explained the blood prison to her in a succinct and distinctive manner. Someone framed me and I was sent to the highest security prison in my home world. I found out that the director framed me for the power I hold and then kicked his ass, after he released a monster into the world, whose ass I also kicked. Now Tida was half bewildered. My actions redeemed me to my friends. Tida didn't need to know that the statement was false. When Naruto told Tida, her eyes widened in realization. If you truly want to help Tigra-san, give him this word of advice. They label you a traitor, prove them wrong. By offering her advice that might help Tigra overcome his depression, this blonde shinobi, who at times seems more like the biggest idiot in the world, is attempting to assist her. Despite being the most unpredictable idiot, shinobi, Naruto isn't able to plan for everything. Things like Tida giving him a sudden hug and repeatedly saying, thank you. Tida bowed to him after she released him, gave him a final, thank you. That made his head hurt, and then ran up the hill in the direction of Tigra and Lim. Naruto went to find some food of the gods, but he didn't hear what they were saying. Ramen. In the mess of the camp a sudden chill went through the camp's cooks, and they all felt compelled to bring out the ramen they had saved for a certain ramen-eating monster. A few minutes prior, Ellen and Sophia were together. After Naruto left the tent, Ellen inquired, so, how are the other war maidens? Looney was handed over to Ellen for another round of TLC, tender loving care, after Sophia got up. The blonde said, Mila is, you know, don't you? Ellen said, yeah. Yelizaveta maintains conventional ties with both Duke Tenedir and Duke Ganelin. Valentina's principality is far removed from Brune. She should be fine for now. Olga is currently gathering her forces. Her reason is currently unknown. Sophia went on. Unknown? Inquired Ellen. Ever since she lost to Naruto in an official fight, she has been acting strangely, though I don't know what her plans are at the moment. Sophia elaborated. Sasha probably is ill as always. At the present it is safe to say that most of the other war maidens won't take any actions, the way Mila did. Sophia looked gloomy. More importantly, I'm concerned about how the country will act with regard to Sir Tigravormud, now that he's been branded a traitor. Ellen took a breath and asked, the country? Yes. For example, regiments that serves directly under the king. Sophia replied. After a few days, as soon as Bertrand entered a war council between Ellen, Lim, Naruto, Tigra, and Hughes, Sophia's statement nearly became a prophecy. Right now, the Order of Navarre is approaching us. The captain of this, Roland, bears the title, Black Knight, and is said to be the greatest knight in all of Brune, according to Tigra's former assistant. Roland? Inquired Naruto. Never heard of him. Ignoring the blonde swordsman, shinobi, Tigra remarked, even I have heard the name of Roland. Ellen's voice was so teasing that it was hard to tell it was a compliment. Ho, if even backwoods Tigra has heard the name of this man, she started. Ever since Roland became a knight at 13, he has been undefeated, Hughes stated. 13, huh? Naruto thought, that age brings back memories. When he was first assigned to the Order of Navarre, the king even bestowed upon him the national treasure of Durandal, Hughes went on. But then, royal knights swear their allegiance to His Majesty. They will only take orders from His Majesty, Tigra replied. I will at least try sending a messenger for now, Hughes responded. A few more days later, the Order of Navarre was not particularly swayed by Hughes' message. One of the war veteran noblemen who remained faithful to Tigra stated, Duke Thénardier or Duke Ganelin was supposed to be our enemy. Why is a knightly order coming at us with swords drawn? I don't care how closely they're our king with us, there is no call for deferring to a foreign army, and not be spilling blood with fellow Brunemen. A different noble replied. In other words, you'd rather rely on the Order of Navarre, instead of the ZHCTED army, replied Hughes. Tigra rose, his voice full of rage, and said, the lawlessness of Duke Ganelin and the inhumanity of Duke Thénardier did not start just yesterday. Has any order of knights denounced them, and set them straight? The third nobleman explained, well, that's because knightly orders act under orders of the king. Tigra gave his command for the impending conflict. We will fight, all of us, for our own sakes. Hughes persuaded the remaining nobles to stick with Tigra by saying, you are absolutely correct. That is why we are here now, turning not to knights, but to the army of ZHCTED. The following day, in the middle of the Orange Plains, the Sylar Meteor army established their positions. The Order of Navarre formed a spear wall in front of them. Roland yelled, exterminate the enemies of the crown, and Durandal was drawn. With a shout, follow after my sword. He spurred his horse to a gallop. The knightly order roared after him, and when he engaged the SMA, he once again demonstrated why he was referred to as Brune's strongest knight. Roland wielded Durandal as if it were as light as a rapier, despite the fact that it was at least 5 asans long and nearly an asan wide. The black armored knight was wreaking havoc, and Ellen exclaimed, Lim, you've got command. Then she charged directly at Roland, who anticipated her approach. Although she was able to deflect his initial blow, the momentum caused her to be pushed back. Roland commended her, saying, it's been a long time since anyone withstood my sword. What is your name? Ellen identified herself as Eleonora Vilteria, one of the 7 war maidens. There was not a single soldier or knight like this in all of Saxtine and all of Asver, Roland reflected. Is it possible that a girl likes her? Roland identified himself as, I am Roland, captain of the Order of Navarre. War maiden, I don't know what your reasons are. I will not allow anyone to enter the land of Brune without the permission of His Majesty. After killing a few knights who attempted to help Ellen and Roland fought again. Roland's strong and quick attacks forced Ellen to retreat, and she ultimately had to fall off her horse to avoid becoming mincemeat. The still-mounted knight's senses alerted him to danger behind him as she considered using her dragon arts against Roland. Roland was able to bring his sword around to block Naruto's downward slash with his katana, and Naruto, tisk, ed. Using his improvisational skills, Naruto kicked Roland hard, sending the Black Knight sprawling to the ground as Naruto landed a short distance away. Roland yelled at Naruto, and the two got into a ferocious fight. Like Ellen, Naruto was being pushed back by Roland's attack's strength, though he did manage to land a few of his own. Ellen marveled as Naruto appeared to be able to compete with Roland on level ground. She saw her own horse charging in her direction, and the sound of a horse galloping brought her back to the present. She jumped on, returned her focus to the duel, and galloped in right away, her face displaying her dismay. Just a moment before, as Naruto grew used to Roland's attack style, the battle between the two became more of a standoff. However, he had to concede that Roland had an iron defense, and a power that would have made Sakura and Granny Tsunade proud. Roland thought, this guy's swordsmanship is even better than that Eleonora chick's. In that case, his attacks lack strength, but his blocking and counter-attacking skills are far superior to mine. Roland used both hands to grasp the hilt of his sword and struck Naruto with a forceful downward chop. Naruto chose to block the blow, but his sword broke. Roland struck Naruto diagonally during the shock, causing the ribcage bones to cut or tear and the lower torso organs to sustain minor damage. Roland's senses screamed again before he could deliver the final blow, and he ducked just in time to dodge an arrow. Looking in the direction of the arrow, he saw a blonde woman in light blue armor riding toward him with another arrow ready, as well as a pink-haired archer. He heard another horse behind him, so he turned to see Eleonora scooping the fallen Naruto off the ground and tossing him over the saddle in front of her. In the meantime, Tigra continued to charge Roland, poised to fire another close-range arrow. Roland, however, surprised him by launching himself at him before he could fire, cutting through his horse's neck and then continuing to deliver a critical cut just below Tigra's ribcage. As he fell, Tigra let go of the arrow almost straight up into the air. The blonde yelled, "Tigra!" as she caught the archer who was still falling and threw him over the saddle, just like Ellen had done. Roland watched as both horses rode off, pausing briefly atop a hill to reposition the two injured riders and put them in front of the unhurried ones. Roland summoned his horse with a whistle and mounted it. Even with his bulky armor, he was able to close the distance on the two horses before an arrow swung down from the sky and hit his mount exactly where the skull and spine joined. For the second time that day, Roland collapsed to the ground in shock. Roland looked at the arrow and knew it was the one the archer had thrown into the air. He reasoned, that wasn't a missed shot. Who exactly is that archer? After considering his options for a while, Roland turned and marched back to his camp. He couldn't possibly catch up to two horses on foot. "Captain Roland," erupted a rider who rushed toward him, "we have spotted around 300 heavy cavalry towards outflank. Have our forces pull back. Send word to the enemy leaders. This battle shall be continued tomorrow." Roland responded. "And see if you can find me a riderless horse, please." Masha's Rodant, the commander of the 300 heavy cavalry that arrived to support Tigra, and the SMA leaders both agreed to Roland's proposal for a short-term ceasefire. In any event, neither side had the strength to carry on fighting. In the meantime, Roland was recalling the time he attempted to meet with the king to obtain additional directives. Rewind. Roland asked Ganelon and Thénardier, who were standing in front of him, "So then, I cannot get an audience with His Majesty?" The cowardly Ganelon stood atop the tiny staircase, while Thénardier was on the same level as Roland to show his respect for the strong knight. Ganelon said, "Sir Roland, His Majesty is ill, please understand." Thénardier stated, "It is hard on us, too. In order to soothe His Majesty's heart, we would appreciate it if you could eradicate former Count Vorn and the army from ZHCTED that is now running amok in Brünn." Ganelon replied, "I will send my 2nd Division as well as the 5th Cavalry under my command to guard the borders to Saxtein and Asver in your absence." "One," said Thénardier. Roland glanced up at that. "Are his finest soldiers being sent to guard the border?" Roland pondered, feeling uneasy about this situation. "Why are you not sending those troops to deal with the former count?" Roland inquired. "The area where Vorn currently is in lies between both of our own domains, and with the rising tensions between our own forces, any military act close to the other's border will likely bring this nation into civil war. The knightly orders in the north are currently preoccupied with a pirate menace." Thénardier went on to explain. Roland was able to conceal his skepticism, but he was unable to refute Thénardier's assertions. For many years, Nice has been the only neutral location between those two, and the northern knightly orders were in fact getting ready for a significant pirate attack. The end of the flashback. "I still do not trust those two. I had better finish this battle with all due haste, and go see His Majesty," Roland thought to himself. That night, SMA camp. The news that not one but two of their strongest individuals had been critically or fatally wounded caused a slight downturn in the camp's atmosphere. While receiving treatment, Naruto, the person who was fatally wounded, woke up and was able to deliver a message to the troops that the medics forwarded to him. If I find out you lose this battle just because you feel disheartened by my injury, I will find you in heaven and or hell and prank them so hard that you will remember it in your next life, Naruto had stated. The fact that the most seriously wounded soldier used humor to cheer themselves up had made many laugh, and it was effective. Nobody truly understood that Naruto was a quick healer and had a strong constitution. He would have been up and playing tricks on them earlier, so what would they be saying? Yes, indeed, too soon. Ellen, Lim, and Moshes were in the command tent at the same time. Ellen thanked Sir Moshes, saying, "Thank you, Sir Moshes. Because of you, the enemy called for a ceasefire for the night." "Never mind that. How is Tigra and that Naruto brat doing?" replied Moshes. Lim and Ellen became serious. "It's serious. Tigra has a light fever but is resting peacefully," Lim stated. "Naruto is a different issue. His body is burning up, the skin hot to the touch near his injury. Also, we had to tie him down in order for him not to thrash around." Ellen continued. "There is something else though." Lim and Moshes turned to her and said, During his fight with Roland he managed to fight on par with Roland for a while." Ellen's comments shocked the elderly gentleman. "Yet I can't shake this feeling that something was holding him back from fighting to his fullest potential." Alongside Tigra, Tita was kneeling beside Tigra's sleeping body, clutching his hand as if in prayer for the archer's speedy recovery. Alongside Naruto, although the medics were relieved that Naruto had calmed down, his fever persisted, but it was a start. Returning to the command tent, "Pardon my abruptness, Moshes, but tell us what happened in the capital," Hughes responded. Moshes started telling them, "I did not get an audience with the king, and as a last resort, I barged into the palace." He explained to them how his longtime friend Badwin had assisted and what Thenardier and Ganelon had done to the area. When Moshes revealed that the king was playing with woodblocks and that his spirit had been totally broken, everyone was taken aback. He also explained the strange behavior. Hughes remarked, "How pitiful, the grief of losing the prince." Moshes informed them, "Only a few people, starting with Badwin, know about his majesty." "However, Ganelon and Thenardier are probably aware," Ellen responded. "And whatever the circumstances may be, Tigra needs a very good reason, a just cause, for bringing in foreign soldiers." Moshes continued. "That is what Badwin told me. So if there is no treacherous intent, he may gain his majesty's forgiveness," said Hughes. "I don't suppose there's any way he could receive such a statement. Which is exactly why Roland is acting to strike against him without just cause," said Moshes. "Thenardier and Ganelon put him up to it." For a brief moment, no one spoke. It is canon how Moshes met Sophia. 1. I felt that the anime's discussion lacked substance, so I expanded on it a little. Chapter 12. When some soldiers inquired about Tigra's condition, Bertrand replied, "Yeah, he's all right. Don't worry, he should regain consciousness tomorrow." Ellen questioned, "Who are those men?" "Some soldiers who were concerned about the young lord were asking about him," replied Bertrand. "From Alsace?" inquired Lim. Bertrand informed them, "No, they were men that Viscount Augur brought with him. Apparently one of them heard that the enemy's leader had landed a blow against the young lord." Ellen said, "I see, anyone asking about Naruto?" "Several people have come to pay their respect to him. That or they wished to tell him that they would do their best tomorrow, and in the case that we lost, he should not go and seek them out in the afterlife as a pranking target," Bertrand continued, chuckling at the very end. Lim and Ellen grinned. "But the majority of those who come here wanted an update on the young lord," said Bertrand. Within the tent, Lim pushed the flap aside to enter the tent's compartment where Tigra was, and Tita looked up. She said, "May I have a moment? I just want a minute with him. There is something I want to tell him." After a moment of hesitation, Tita said in a tone-dead voice, "Very well." After the maid left, Lim approached Tigra and clasped his hand. Holding his hand where her heart is, Lim said, "Tigra, you are asleep, so you probably can't hear me, so please hear my words through your heart and my heartbeat through your hand." Lim felt her heart race and her eyes began to well up with tears as she said, "Please come back to the land of consciousness soon. Tita needs you. Your army needs you. Your home needs you. I need you." Lim sobbed into his hand, which she now held to her face, and said, "Please, use my love for you to get better soon." Alongside Naruto, Ellen asked the medic, "Will you give us a minute in private?" She got up to leave the two of them alone and said, "Of course." Ellen held Naruto's hand while kneeling beside him. When she first saw his bandaged torso, she assumed that the bandages had just been changed because there wasn't much blood on them for a wound that severe that was only a few hours old. "Naruto, if you can hear me, please listen to my voice and my heart," Ellen responded. Tears began streaming down her cheeks as she said, "I wish that you hadn't come to help me in the battle, but I would like to thank you for coming. I know that you are strong enough to survive a wound like this, but please, fight to live, fight for your friends, fight, that I may continue to love someone and not lose the will to live, again." Ellen was crying quietly at this point. In other places Naruto stood in front of a big cage that looked like it had been blown open. He said, "Where am I?" His mindscape looked like some kind of sewer, but it didn't look like that. Rather, he was surrounded by ruins that he had never seen before, though he occasionally recognized the Uzumaki swirl. Am I dreaming? Naruto turned and saw a blond man wearing a white cloak with red flames at the bottom. "Yes and no," he said. The man went on, "Your physical body is unconscious," before the red-haired woman beside him spoke up. She spoke, "But you are now in your mindscape, Sochi." "Father," and Naruto gave her a long look before lifting his head and crossing his arms. Who are you?" The woman let out a sigh. She questioned the man, "Did you not tell him about me?" "I had limited time back then and the seal was about to be fully released," he continued. She turned to Naruto and uttered, "Oh well, Naruto." Naruto questioned, "Yes, Tomato Head?" His father immediately moved a few paces away from the woman. She growled, "Who are you calling Tomato Head?" Her eyes turned white, and her hair drifted behind her in 9 groups, reminding Naruto of the Kyuubi. The key was undoubtedly sufficient to bring the Biju to heal. Naruto hid behind a nearby group of ruins and questioned, "Are you perhaps the remnants of the Kyuubi in human form?" She snarled, "Answer my fucking question," and approached him. "What do you have against tomatoes?" A shivering Naruto asked. As the female smashed a nearby wall as if it were made of origami paper blocks, Naruto started to run, saying, "They're pretty tasty, but they make excellent material to play pranks with." The man yelled over, "Naruto, calling your mother anything related to a tomato is a death wish." The woman, who was now identified as Naruto's mother, persisted in her attack on Naruto, saying, "Shut up, Minato. Son or not, this one needs a lesson in thinking before speaking. I have got 16 years worth of disciplinary training to impose on him." Minato said, "Kushina, please don't. Don't you fucking dare." Kushina gave him a look, but when she looked back to where Naruto had been, he was gone. Chains grew out of Kushina's back as she yelled, "You are not getting away from me," and made her way to where she thought Naruto was hiding. When Naruto realized he had been caught, he went pale. A mother's 16-year-old son's disciplinary action condensed into 16 minutes later. Naruto believed he was going to die because he had not yet realized that the woman was his mother, and he would have completely agreed with Kiba and Shikamaru that mothers are frightening. Somewhere else Shikamaru and Kiba shivered violently. Temari questioned the two. "What is wrong?" Shikamaru noted that it was troublesome. Hell must be freezing over. "Did you also have the feeling that Naruto actually agreed with us on something?" replied Kiba. Naruto is back, after a lengthy explanation. It was debatable whether Naruto's tears were due to the abuse he had received from his mother or to his joy at finally meeting both of his parents. He was informed by Kushina and Minato about their lives and the events of October 10, 16 years ago. After telling them about his life, Naruto explained that he had paid those who had caused his problems back twice over in pranks, which was the only reason his mother didn't have another outburst. When Naruto told them about Ellen, she practically squealed. Then, out of nowhere, a window appeared beside them, revealing Ellen kneeling next to him, crying and holding his hand to her heart. "Naruto, if you can hear me, please listen to my voice and my heart." Ellen responded. She started crying as they watched. "I would like to thank you for coming to help me in the battle, but from my heart I wish that you hadn't," she said. Ellen was crying quietly now, but those who were watching could still hear her. "I know that you are strong enough to survive a wound like this, but please, fight to live, fight for your friends, fight, that I may continue to love someone and not lose the will to live, again." Minato blew a whistle. Kushina grinned and ruffled Naruto's hair as she remarked, "Anata, he really is your son, getting the best woman there is." Minato remarked, "Pity he doesn't have your hair though." Kushina continued to ruffle Naruto's hair, which irritated him, and said, "Oh, now that he's met us, we can change that." Naruto said, "Besides that, why are you here?" When the Kyuubi was removed from him, the two of them explained, the Shinigami felt sorry for him and took Kushina's soul from the afterlife. freed Minato's soul from the seal, and reinserted his own soul, which was just barely hanging on to his body. Naruto said, "Huh?" after becoming disoriented at the 10th word. "Basically we were brought back to life inside you, taking the place that the Kyuubi would have taken," said Minato. Had Naruto not begun to fade, they would still be conversing. Kushina remarked, "This world is much better for him than Konoha was. It has had a clear effect on his mindscape, don't you agree?" Minato gave a nod, in the meantime, returning to the living. Standing atop a hill with a view of the camp were Ellen and Sophia. Sophia said, "The wind is picking up, huh? I wonder if it is going to rain." Ellen remarked, "It sure looks like it." They remained silent for a moment. "Are you planning on using your dragon art against a mortal human?" Sophia inquired. Ellen replied, "I am." Sophia grinned. She said, "I'll give you a hand with that." Ellen said with a tone of surprise, "Sophie, you're here as an envoy. You can't do that, can you?" Sophia responded, "Your resolve seems to be contagious. My interest in both Sir Tigervormud and Naruto-san has been sparked quite deeply." "Hey, now," said Ellen. "If you want Tigra, talk to Lim. And you can't have Naruto, he's mine." At that, both women burst out laughing, though Sophia might not have taken Ellen's statement seriously. At the command tent of the Order of Navarre, Roland had inquired as to whether Tigra had previously interacted with ZHCTED. Olivier responded, "No, although he has territory near the border, apparently there has been no association with ZHCTED up to then." Roland remarked, "I doubt such a man would suddenly develop any ambitions." He heard Olivier say, "About that, I heard that Duke Thénardier has dispatched a force to Alsace in Count Vorn's absence." Startled by the news, Roland questioned, "Are you certain about that?" "According to Olivier, nearly all of my sources have said the same thing. What do we do, Roland?" Roland thought for a moment, then answered, "We proceed as planned." Olivier questioned, "Are you sure about that? There is a ZHCTED army within our borders. For me, that's enough," Roland replied. "Just what sort of person are you, Tigervormud Vorn?" he pondered. "Oh, what can you tell me about that swordsman I faced?" Roland responded. "To be honest, all that I could get from our agent in the enemy camp was that he is a mercenary working solely for the Venades of Wind, Eleonora Vilteria. His full name is Naruto Uzumaki, if I read the report correctly. He apparently threatened the ZHCTED king when he tried ordering this Naruto person, stating that he will only take orders from Lady Eleonora. And apparently those two are the next best thing to a relationship at the moment," Olivier stated to him. Roland remarked, "That is not much to go on." Pulling out a piece of paper as if to check something, Olivier said, "Apparently he appeared in Lightmerits around the same time as the battle at Dinant, working as a freelance mercenary. Apparently he comes from a very distant land where men and women are trained from a very young age to move stealthily, but also to be great and powerful warriors. Added to that, Naruto had shown moments where he could move at extreme speeds." Olivier turned to Roland. "And that is pretty much everything I managed to discover about him." "He's a mystery," Roland remarked. "Too bad I had to land a fatal wound upon him. I would have liked to fight him again." Olivier questioned, "Is that respect I am hearing? He is the only one I know of who was able to successfully hold his own against me and Durandal. I must say though, that sword of his was very impressive," said Roland. The following morning, the encounter between Tigra and Tir-Na-Fa, the goddess of death and darkness, is identical to that in the anime. Leaving the wounded at their camp, the SMA moved out shortly before dawn and took up positions on the opposite side of a large river. The Order of Navarre formed a three-layered crescent on the opposite side of the valley. When the SMA wasn't on the defense, the various groups would attack from multiple angles at various times. A good plan, a solid strategy in words and on paper. As the second and third groups of Navarre knights took their places, the first group charged with a roar. However, every plan had flaws, particularly if the opposition had the opportunity to research this popular one and figure out a way to stop it from happening in the first place. The riders were flung from their saddles and into the deep quagmire that the ground had abruptly turned into just as the first group had barely made it to the bottom of the valley. The plan's weakness was that it would collapse if the horses' footings were removed. In this instance, the river was being redirected by stacking sandbags, which caused the valley to fill with water. Rocks and arrows flew among them, fired from the SMA soldiers' slings or bows. Roland came out to pursue Ellen after she caused some chaos on the flank of the Navarre formation, which he duly did. In the meantime, Tigra was ignoring the waves of pain from his wound as he galloped towards the battlefield after somehow obtaining a horse. Returning to camp, the soldiers still at camp were on high alert when the nurse entered the tent carrying a new bundle of bandages and then rushed out screaming, especially after they were able to calm her down enough for her to explain what had happened. Before long, the whole camp was in disarray as everyone searched for Naruto, who had vanished, leaving behind the bloody and torn bandages that had once covered him. They were all right to look for him, but he wasn't in the camp. With Roland, Ellen, and Sophia, Ellen, Sophie, and Roland's battle is similar to that in the anime, as are his inquiries to Tigra. Instead of aiming his light and wind-powered dark arrow, directly at Roland, Tigra chose to deflect it, sending it flying into a nearby hill, where it was obliterated. I'll give you that it was a strong shot, but Roland started to move toward the three. Tigra was barely conscious after his wound had opened. Roland and the three of them jumped in alarm as a new voice said, "You know, behind him. I am glad that some of my abilities are not known, such as my heightened healing factor." It was Naruto, and he was carrying two short swords that looked like his, now broken, sword. Naruto then launched an attack, saying, "Because otherwise you would have noticed me approaching." And Roland was at a disadvantage almost instantly. Since dual wielding is a very uncommon skill and he had never heard of anyone outside of the circus using it, he never bothered to learn the counters to opponents. Those guys only did it for show. Roland remarked, "I have never engaged in combat with a dual sword wielder before." Naruto told him, "I don't like using this style. It too strongly evokes the more sinister side of my training." "Darker side?" Roland inquired. As though in response, Naruto launched a vicious combo attack on him, quickly destroying Roland's armor and inflicting injuries. Naruto muttered, killing disarmed opponents. Then Roland noticed Naruto's forehead was covered in many beads of sweat. "How about this? As a fellow warrior, I'll demonstrate to you one of my best techniques, in fact, one of my best techniques, which I primarily use against lone enemies," Naruto proposed. As he prepared for the final battle, Roland remarked, "Very well." He witnessed Naruto extend his right hand and sheath both of his swords. More for himself than for the people listening, Naruto muttered, "I am glad that I practiced doing this after arriving here." About 4 centimeters above his hand, a tiny glowing speck grew into a glowing orb about twice as large, and another orb appeared in Naruto's left hand. Before anyone could question what that was, Naruto started to move, slowly at first, then faster, and finally running. Roland readied himself to confront Naruto, who was brandishing an unidentified weapon that neither he nor anyone else in that world had ever seen. Roland struck out when Naruto was about 6 asans away, but Naruto managed to get in Roland's defense and avoid the blow by just an inch. He yelled, "Rasenrangen," as he slammed both orbs into Roland's chest, causing the remaining armor to shatter and sending him flailing. Roland was on his knees on the other side of the crater, and Naruto was on his knees, clutching the spot where his wound had been after the explosion subsided. "Naruto." Ellen ran to her kneeling love interest and yelled. Roland got up with a stutter. Naruto stumbled, gasping for air. How can he stand after taking 2 Rasengans at once? He probably shouldn't have released the resistance seals he had requested his late godfather to make for him. Naruto asked himself, "Crap, why didn't I let my body heal fully again?" Roland dropped to his knees abruptly, his hands barely able to grasp Durandal. "I am beaten," he replied. "I can't raise my arms." He thought, "As I am now, I cannot win." I was unable to shake off my own doubt at the end. He declared to the 4 individuals on the opposite side of the crater, "I surrender." Both Tigra and Naruto exhaled a sigh of relief as they allowed their consciousness to leave them. The battle ended with Roland's surrender, but the SMA's victory was not without cost. Both the SMA and the Order of Navarre lost almost half of their troops in the second battle, and 2 of the Silver Meteor Army's most formidable soldiers were injured and rendered unconscious for the second time in 2 days.
I will continue the story in next part. Till then, we weeb offline.